Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight, we will explore the intriguing realm of Greek mythology. As usual, please share your location with us as you listen. Get comfortable, settle in, and let's start. In the beginning, there was no Olympus, no land, no sea, and no sky. There existed only chaos. This chaos was unlike the disorder or confusion we often refer to today. It was a primordial void, an immense emptiness lacking form or direction. It transcended concepts of good or evil, or even neutrality. It simply existed. From this ancient emptiness emerged the first signs of existence. Gaia, the unshakable earth. Tartarus, the dark abyss below. And Eros, the force of love and desire, which would bind all future creations. These entities were not yet gods in the traditional sense, but elemental truths given life. Following them came Nyx, the night, cloaked in such a deep shadow that even chaos shied away. She was accompanied by Erebus, representing the underworld's darkness, who would dwell beside her in that early silence. From their union, Ether, the pure air of the heavens, and Hemera, personifying day, emerged, destined to eternally chase her mother across the sky. Thus, the cycle of night and day began, not through scientific explanation, but through myth, led by unusual, unseen titans who illuminated and dimmed the sky with each passing hour. Gaia, the essence of Earth, was not idle. She was patient and fertile. From her, she birthed Uranus, the vast and starry sky, who was both her son and partner. As he stretched across the heavens, the world found its initial shape, a dome above a broad, endless expanse. Gaia also created towering mountains and Pontus, the sea, who surged with his own will long before any ships or sea monsters set sail on his waters. Together, earth and sky formed the first significant pair, and their union gave rise to the Titans, the first powerful beings that would govern the cosmos long before Zeus and his lineage gained power. In total, there were 12 Titans, 6 sons and 6 daughters, each possessing tremendous elemental significance. Among the sons were Oceanus, the encompassing river, Hyperion, the light-bearer, Cus, the inquirer, Chryas, the constellation-bearer, Iapetus, the ancestor of mankind, and Cronus, the youngest and most cunning. The daughters included Dea, the radiant mother of sun and moon, Rhea, destined to be the mother of gods, Themis, representing divine law, Mnemosyne, the embodiment of memory, Phoebe, the luminous one, and Tethys, the life-giving sea. However, Gaia's ability to give birth was not limited to these titans. She also produced fearsome offspring. The first of these were the Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, each with a single eye that glowed like a forge, known for crafting lightning and unafraid of gods or giants. Next emerged the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed giants, each one colossal and fearsome, possessing 50 heads and 100 arms, capable of shaking the very foundations of the earth in their fury. Though Uranus was lord of the sky, he quivered at the sight of these monstrous children, feeling shame and fear at their grotesque power. He forcibly returned them to Gaia's womb, sealing them away beneath layers of earth and sorrow. As a result, Gaia groaned under the burden of her children, and while she had once been a proud, nurturing entity, she now suffered with every breath. In this turmoil, she began to plot revenge, but that story will be saved for another time. For now, remember this. In the ancient times before order or justice, before sword or plow, the world was shaped not by hands but through force, union, and grief. Chaos initiated the first forms, but it was Gaia, the Great Mother, who provided them with a foundation. The union of Gaia and Uranus, earth, and sky represented the cosmos's first great marriage, a union formed not by altars or witnesses, but by necessity and nature. The sky enveloped the earth, holding her close, pressing her beneath his starry body night after night. Their union led to the creation of the Titans and other powerful progeny, yet it also gave rise to an intensifying sorrow. Uranus, despite his vastness, was a jealous and fearful father. He perceived Gaia's monstrous children not as embodiments of strength, but as threats to his dominion. He viewed the Cyclopes and the hundred-handed giants with revulsion rather than wonder, and swiftly condemned them back into Gaia's womb. Deep within the Earth's belly, where light never penetrated and no voice could be heard, Gaia groaned under their weight, experiencing not only the agony of carrying them again, but also the betrayal of Uranus, who failed to appreciate their children as she did. Night after night, Uranus descended upon her, bringing down the heavens upon the earth, oblivious to her suffering and deaf to her sorrow. She could no longer bear it. From her own body, she created a weapon, not crafted from bronze or iron materials that had yet to be conceived, but a formidable sickle made of resilient flint, jagged as truth and sharp as vengeance. She approached her Titan sons, the eldest and most powerful of her offspring, and revealed her anguish. "Your father has betrayed me," she declared. "He has imprisoned your brothers and silenced the womb that bore you. Who among you will assist me?" One by one, they turned away, intimidated by their father's strength. Only Cronus, the youngest and the most cunning, with observant eyes and a patient demeanor, stepped forward. "I will do it," he promised. "Give me the blade." Thus, Gaia set her trap, awaiting Uranus as he descended to cover her in darkness. In the shadows, Cronus sprang into action. Wielding the sickle firmly and without hesitation, he struck down his father. Uranus's cry reverberated through the sky as the blade pierced deeply, severing the essence of his power. Cronus cast the bloodied remains into the ocean, and from the crimson foam that rose, something astonishing emerged. From that white froth came Aphrodite, the goddess of love and desire, destined to bring both ruin to kings and destruction to empires. She graced the shores of Cyprus, radiant and composed, untouched by her violent beginnings. However, Gaia's revenge did not stop at bloodshed. From the droplets that fell upon the earth arose other beings, the Furies shrouded in shadow and vengeance, destined to haunt oathbreakers and kinslayers. Giants who would eventually rise against the gods, and the Malaya, nymphs of the ash trees, protectors of nature and ancient traditions. Uranus, wounded and overthrown, retreated into the heavens, leaving the world to his offspring. Before his departure, it is said he uttered a final curse that would echo through time. "Just as I was usurped by my son, so too shall he be usurped by his own." It was not a prophecy he created, but a truth that Gaia had already whispered, which Cronus understood well. He took the throne of the skies and wrapped himself in power. Yet from the moment he seized it, he began to dread the warning his father had given. Thus, the reign of Uranus, the first ruler of the cosmos, came to an end, ushering in the era of the Titans. Even so, within the fabric of time, the next upheaval was already brewing. With Uranus toppled and the sky no longer pressing so heavily upon the earth, the world sighed with relief. The Titans, emancipated from their father's dominion, now stood tall beneath the heavens. Cronus, the youngest and most astute among them, declared his command over all. He was not a god wreaking chaos or cruelty as his father had become, but ruled with caution and suspicion. The sickle he had used to vanquish Uranus remained concealed, buried in the earth or cast into the sea, its blade remembered but unseen, like a hidden sin. Cronus had freed his mother from suffering and his siblings from confinement, but from the instant he took the cosmic throne, he was haunted by the prophecy that had spurred his insurrection. His father's dying words echoed within him like a second heartbeat, suggesting he too would be overthrown by his own offspring. To fulfill his role as king, Cronus took a wife. He chose Rhea, his sister, embodying a blend of gentle strength and deep wisdom, though her name would eventually be linked to anguish. They ruled during a time later poets would refer to as a golden age, an era when mortals, freshly created, lived in tranquility, untroubled by suffering or strife, with the earth's bounty flourishing effortlessly. It was a time before kings commanded armies, before men erected walls or worshipped deities, when justice moved among humans without being seen, and no one needed to lock their doors. However, such peace, as history has shown, is transient. Eventually, Rhea began to bear children, and with each birth, Cronus recalled his father's curse. Without hesitation, as Rhea placed each newborn in his arms, first Hestia, then Demeter, then Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, he opened his jaws wide and swallowed them entirely. No sign remained, not a cry nor a cradle, only the knowledge that they were hidden away within their father's belly, like seeds waiting in winter soil. He told Rhea it was essential. He could not share the same fate as Uranus and needed to protect the throne. Rhea, though proud and strong, found herself powerless against him. She wept, but her tears bore no fruit. 5 times she gave birth, and 5 times she lost her children to the insatiable hunger of her husband's fears. However, with the 6th pregnancy, she resolved to take action. When she felt the child stir within her, she chose not to approach Cronus. She escaped to the island of Crete, where towering mountains touched the heavens and deep caverns lay hidden beneath the earth. Among shepherds and nymphs, she gave birth to her youngest son, Zeus. From the very moment he entered the world, Rhea sensed his uniqueness. His cry resonated through the trees. His eyes opened before he took his first breath, and when he gripped her finger, he did so with the strength of destiny. To trick Cronus, Rhea swaddled a stone and presented it to him, her hands trembling with fear. Believing the danger had passed, he swallowed it eagerly. Meanwhile, hidden under Mount Ida, the infant Zeus was nurtured in secret. He was protected by the Curids, warriors who danced and clashed their shields to mask his cries, and fed by the goat Amalpha, whose milk endowed him with immense strength. As Zeus matured, so did the storm of change that would eventually shake the world. Nonetheless, the reign of Cronus persisted, with the sky high, the earth lush, and the Titans reigning from their thrones, unaware of the impending storm. Deep within Cronus, 5 children stirred in the shadows, while far to the west, a secret child observed the stars and bided his time. Deep within Cronus, 5 children stirred in the shadows, while far to the west, a secret child observed the stars and bided his time. In the concealed recesses of Mount Ida, where the air was sparse and the wind murmured ancient names through the rocks and trees, Zeus transitioned into manhood. Raised in secrecy, away from his father's sight, he learned about the world not through literature, but through the whispers of the towering peaks, the rustling leaves, and the guarded tales shared by his protectors around the fire. He continued to drink the milk from the divine goat Amala, who had nurtured him since birth, and from her broken horn emerged the cornucopia, a symbol of unending abundance. After Amala's death, Zeus honored her by placing her hide among the stars, ensuring her memory lingered in the sky he would eventually rule. However, he was not destined for solitude or stargazing. The blood coursing through him brimmed with prophecy, and his bones bore the weight of insurrection. As he reached adulthood, Dia began to awaken. She recalled Cronus's betrayal, the suffering of her imprisoned sons, the 100-handed giants and the Cyclopes confined deep within Taurus. Her quest for vengeance was not over. It had merely been postponed. With words as ancient as the stones, she whispered truths into Zeus's dreams and guided his steps during waking hours. She first directed him to Metis, the embodiment of wisdom, known for her prudent counsel and loyalty that leaned towards the future. Together with Metis, Zeus devised a strategy. To confront Cronus, the Titan King, would require more than mere strength. It required cunning. Disguised, he returned to his father's residence and, with Metis's craft, offered Cronus a potion mixed with wine bittersweet and thick as honey. The drink churned within the old Titan, and ultimately, with a shudder and a groan, Cronus expelled the children he had consumed long ago. They emerged not as mere infants, but fully grown and radiant, adorned with the power of the gods, reborn into a world prepared for war. The first to emerge was Hestia, goddess of the hearth and flame. Next came Demeter, the goddess of grain. Then regal Hera, sharp-eyed and proud, followed by Hades, the lord of the dead, and finally Poseidon, master of the oceans. The six siblings united for the first time and gazed at the throne that had cast them into darkness, vowing not to forget. However, Cronus had allies as well. The Titans rallied around him, his brothers and sisters assembling atop Mount Orus, the ancient seat of power in the south. While Oeanus remained detached, too old or wise for blood feuds, the others, Coys, Crius, Hyperion, and Abatus prepared for battle. Thus began the war known to poets as Titanomachy, the clash of Titans and Olympians. This conflict ravaged the heavens and split the earth to its core, raging on for 10 years without respite. Storm clouds and smoke darkened the sky as thunder and fire echoed across the mountains. The young and silent world below watched in terror as its masters battled for dominance. The Titans held onto Orus, ancient and towering, while Zeus and his siblings fortified their position on Mount Olympus, a peak yet unscarred by conflict. The battles were horrendous and ceaseless. Lightning cleaved the sky, tidal waves consumed entire islands, volcanoes erupted, and winds howled like wolves. At times, the war felt interminable, with neither side able to deliver a decisive blow. But Gaia, ever vigilant, recognized that the balance could not shift without unearthing what had long been buried. She advised Zeus once again. To secure victory, he needed to descend into Tartarus and liberate his monstrous uncles, the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, whom Cronus had shackled in fear. With his siblings by his side, Zeus breached the gates of the underworld and freed the imprisoned beings. The grateful Cyclopes bestowed upon Zeus his mightiest weapons, the thunderbolt, the essence of sky and storm, and to Poseidon, the trident with which he would command the seas. To Hades, a helm of darkness was granted, rendering him invisible. Finally, the Hecatonchires, fearsome giants with 100 hands, joined the combat, throwing mountains like projectiles and pummeling the Titans with ancient ferocity. With these formidable allies, the balance shifted. The Olympians surged forward with an unstoppable rage that the Titans could not withstand. Cronos, resolute and defiant, fought until the end. Yet, the prophecy unfolded relentlessly, and the Titans were systematically vanquished, descending from their elevated positions. Zeus refrained from slaying them. Instead, he confined them as his father had done, casting them deep into Tartarus, ensnared in chains crafted by the 100-handed giants, secured behind indestructible bronze gates. Only a few escaped this fate: Prometheus and Epimetheus, who chose to side with the gods, and Themis, who recognized the just nature of their rule. Thus, the era of the Titans concluded. The sky cleared as the world, marred by war and fire, began to mend. Zeus ascended to the throne not through lineage, but through strength, wisdom, and fulfilled destiny. However, even as he took his place among the heavens, the lingering shadow of Cronos' curse followed him like a haunting refrain. Power, once seized, must be vigilantly guarded, and no ruler, divine or mortal, can ever be truly secure. After the war, as calm returned to the world beneath the sky, the victors surveyed the remnants of creation. The Titans were chained in the depths of Tartarus, their lamentations swallowed by the profound void from which no sound emerged. The old order was shattered, but as the echoes of conflict faded, the gods were faced with a new and potentially greater challenge than conquest itself. While victory is forged in the fires of battle, governance requires discernment, patience, and collaboration. The vast, untamed world was filled with both familiar and unknown powers, meaning it could not be dominated by one alone. Zeus, now the eldest among the reborn gods, stood at the heart of this new epic. Although not born first, he was the strongest, the most cunning, and the first to act when action was necessary. Yet the ancient laws, etched not in stone but within the very fabric of the cosmos, did not allow him sole authority. He had two brothers, also battle-hardened and formidable: Poseidon, who commanded the oceans, and Hades, who wore the helm of darkness, moving unseen through both battlefields and the bowels of the earth. They, too, had shed blood, faced dangers, and endured loss. The cosmic throne could not rest solely on Zeus. To do so would risk igniting conflict among siblings once more. Thus, the three Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades gathered to draw lots, not through quarrels or force, but by the whims of fate. This solemn act, guided by the same power that had resonated through Gaia, shaped the course of the Titanomachi. They cast their lots and awaited the results. When the fateful decisions were made, the world was divided into three vast realms. Zeus received the sky, the expansive heavens, and the air between stars and mountains. He became the master of thunder and rain, supervising storms and clouds, reigning as the undisputed king of Olympus, his voice reverberating like thunder, his anger igniting in lightning with the eagle as his symbol, soaring high above. Poseidon claimed the sea, a deep and turbulent expanse brimming with mystery and monsters. He ruled the oceans, rivers, and every bubbling spring, capable of shattering cliffs or calming tempests with his trident. Beneath the surface, he created a palace built of coral and gold, overseeing not just fish and currents, but beings older than time itself, including sea serpents and leviathans, whose names had never been uttered out loud. Hades was assigned the underworld, the realm of the deceased. While not a coveted domain, he accepted it with quiet determination, governing the shadowy realm with stern authority. His kingdom lay below the earth, in darkness away from the sun, where he was the master of souls, the arbiter of mortal fates, and custodian of treasures hidden in the deep, gems, metals, and forgotten secrets. Though men feared him, whispering his name only when necessary, Hades maintained the balance between life and death, adhering steadfastly to the laws he had vowed to uphold. Gaia's flesh was left as a shared realm for all. Mountains had no owner. Fields were traversed by both mortals and spirits, and forests thrived under no single banner. This shared space allowed gods to walk amongst mortals, but it also harbored ambitions, where destiny would continue its subtle work. Thus, the cosmos was established: sky, sea, and underworld. The three brothers, now sovereigns in their domains, vowed not to engage in war with one another, lest the world fracture anew. The deities established their seats of power and assembled their followers. On Mount Olympus, high above the clouds, Zeus convened a council with the gods. Standing beside him were his sisters, Hea, fierce and sharp like winter frost; Diada, whose presence heralded the arrival of spring; and Hestia, the eternal flame at every hearth. Others joined the gathering, both familiar and new: Athena, born of intellect and warfare; Apollo, radiant and far-sighted; Artemis, silent and swift; Ares, known for bloodshed; Hermes, quick in both motion and thought; Heist, marked by a limp yet brilliant; and Aphrodite, whose smile could topple kingdoms. This marked the dawn of a new era, the age of Olympus. Yet, even with thrones established and realms divided, the world would not remain unchanged for long. The gods, despite their immense power, were not exempt from emotions such as pride, love, and anger. Likewise, the mortals beginning to emerge across the lands would introduce their own narratives, conflicts, and sorrows. Though the heavens had been conquered, peace would not be easily achieved with gods in authority. As the remnants of war faded and sunlight returned to the world, Mount Olympus transformed into a magnificent court, eclipsing the titans who once ruled from the stormy Mount Orus in the south. Olympus, situated to the north, towered higher, its peak cloaked in clouds and legend. This mountain was more than a place. It served as a gateway where the divine met the earthly realm. It was at this location that Zeus, having seized the skies through fate and force, united the new assembly of gods. The court of Olympus differed from mortal kingdoms. There were no stone-paved pathways leading to its entrance, no heralds to announce visitors, and no armies stationed nearby. The gods did not require walls for protection, as the very air constituted their boundary, a barrier too high for mortals. Olympus was said to be free of storms, snow, and decay. Its halls were crafted from marble and clouds, with ceilings adorned in starlight and corridors wide enough for the wind to roam. Here, the gods moved not as shadows or portents, but in full radiance, terrifying and vibrant, more alive than anything on the earth below. At the mountain's apex was Zeus, the supreme ruler of gods and mortals, seated upon a throne made of thunder. He wielded power not solely through might, though his strength was unrivaled, but also through fate and the enduring memory of warfare. His voice resonated like distant thunder, and his vision transcended clouds and time. He held in his hand the thunderbolt, a gift from the Cyclopes, a representation of swift and decisive judgment. Yet, he did not govern alone. Flanking him were others, each serving as a vital support in this burgeoning cosmic order. Hea resided by his side, not just as a spouse but as a queen in her own right, embodying marriage, sovereignty, and the fierce protection of a woman wronged. Proud and unwavering, she bore every grudge, and her jealousy would eventually influence the destinies of both gods and mortals. Her crown was not a mere gift, but a testament earned through betrayal and the sacred vows of Olympus. Next was Deita, goddess of agriculture and growth. Wherever her feet graced the earth, it would soften, causing seeds to awaken. Her essence ushered in abundance and harvest. Without her, the ground lay desolate. Although she didn't occupy the heights of thunder and marble, she frequently wandered the lower world, overseeing plowmen and mothers who whispered her name each dawn. Though older and more subdued than many, her might was universally acknowledged. Then came Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, the firstborn of Cronus and Rhea, and the last freed from her father's clutch. She requested no grand temples, epics, wars, or lovers. Instead, she maintained the everlasting flame at the heart of Olympus and protected every home and hearth below. Her gentle power remained constant for as long as fire flickered in households. Hestia made her home on Olympus as well. Over time, younger gods emerged. Some were born in Olympus, others brought forth through unusual means. Athena was the first among them, born not from a womb but from wisdom itself. Fearing that Metis' unborn child might surpass him, Zeus swallowed her, believing that decision would end the threat. However, Metis did not perish. She lived within him, whispering secrets and crafting knowledge in the shadows. One day, Zeus, in great pain, struck his own skull, and Athena erupted from within, fully armed and radiant, her eyes sparkling with keen clarity. She claimed her role as the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and righteous warfare, a virgin warrior who had little tolerance for trivialities. Following her were Apollo and Artemis, twins born of Leto, a titaness who journeyed long and laboriously in search of a sanctuary to deliver her children, a quest fraught with challenges. Ultimately, the floating island of Dos accepted her, where she gave birth to her children. Apollo, radiant and golden-haired, emerged as the deity of light, prophecy, music, and healing. His sister, Artemis, known for her swiftness and silvery presence, became the goddess of the hunt, wild creatures, and moonlight. Together, they heralded a new lineage of gods vibrant, unrestrained, and intricately connected to humanity. Then came Ares, the god of war and bloodshed, offspring of Zeus and Hera, yet uncherished by either. He embodied raw power without restraint and fury without justification, often feared but rarely revered. While chaos followed him, he was frequently outsmarted by cleverness and wisdom. Opposing him was Hephaestus, the god of the forge, who, despite his lameness and twisted form, found solace in craftsmanship. Some say he was born solely of Hera or hurled from Olympus by Zeus. Both stories persist. He channeled his pain into artistry, creating armor, palaces, and automata. Despite his disability, he was among the most essential of the gods. Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and desire, did not enter the world through birth, but emerged from the ocean, created from the severed flesh of Uranus. She surfaced from the waves at Cyprus, embodying both allure and danger. Where she ventured, love, jealousy, calamity, and desire trailed closely, and even Zeus could not fully command her affections. With a mere glance, she ensnared both gods and mortals, and her smiles often held implications. Last to join this initial pantheon was Hermes, the trickster and messenger, child of Zeus and the nymph Maia, who traversed realms with ease. With winged sandals and a playful grin, he managed to steal Apollo's cattle on the day of his birth, using song to mask his mischief and securing his place among the divine before he could even walk. As the herald of the gods, guide of souls, and protector of travelers and thieves, he dissolved boundaries wherever he went. This assembly of deities, imperfect and powerful, was far from saintly. They bickered as siblings do, intervened in mortal matters, fell in love, betrayed one another, engaged in rivalries, and carried out divine retribution. Yet they ruled from Olympus, casting their gaze upon the world below, shaping it to their desires. The age of Titans had passed, giving rise to tales of gods mingling with humans, of heroes born from their unions, and a reality irrevocably transformed by the divine. The earth now had its rulers, but tranquility remained ever tenuous, with fate yet to reveal its final words. Long before humanity constructed marble cities or etched their prayers into stone, the earth lay devoid of human presence. The gods alone governed, their courts elevated upon Olympus, their dominions extensive. Below was a wild, vibrant world filled with beasts and silent mountains, yet lacking hands to cultivate the land, voices to sing to the heavens, or fire to warm the night. It was Prometheus, a titan of ancient lineage, who first envisioned the human form. He was no ally to Cronus, and was never counted among those imprisoned in Tartarus. During the Titan War, Prometheus allied with Zeus, not from loyalty, but from foresight. Given his gift of prophecy, he knew how the tides would shift. His name, meaning foresight, was apt. He had a brother, Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, and they could not have been more different. While Epimetheus acted impulsively, later regretting his actions, Prometheus pondered deeply, questioned every decree, including those from the king of the gods. He existed between the realms of Titans and Olympians, a figure of rational thought amid a universe driven by passion and power. He was the one who first shaped humanity. Some say from clay along riverbanks, smoothing mud into form and breathing life into it. Others claim he fashioned them in the image of the gods, upright, mindful, and endowed with creativity. Regardless, mankind was created weak and vulnerable, lacking claws, fangs, fur, or fire. Exposed under the sky, they trembled in winter, defenseless against the wild. Moved by their plight, Prometheus journeyed to Olympus, seeking a gift to enhance their survival, something that would elevate them above mere beasts. But Zeus declined, perceiving mortals not as promising but perilous. Recently ascending to his throne, he was cautious of emerging forces. "Let them live, but let them be fearful," he proclaimed. "They must understand their subservience to the gods." Fire was an immortal's privilege, his divinity's domain. Hestia's hearth, Zeus's thunderbolt, Hephaestus's forge, these were not for mortal claim. Defiant and just, Prometheus did not relent. In secret, he ascended to the heavens. Prometheus pilfered a flame from Hephaestus' forge and concealed it within a hollow fennel stalk. Descending from Olympus, he presented it to humanity, marking the first time fire crackled beneath the celestial expanse. Smoke ascended in swirls above the treetops, and light repelled darkness. With fire came warmth, safety, the ability to cook, manipulate metal, develop language, and create art. Humanity transformed from a cold and mute existence to one of civilization. However, fire also ignited a spirit of defiance. Zeus soon learned of the theft and was consumed by rage. To punish mankind, he ordered the gods to craft a seemingly precious gift that concealed a curse. Hephaestus molded a woman of striking beauty from clay, while Aphrodite endowed her with a lure. Hermes granted her wit, and Athena clothed her in shimmering garments. This woman, named Pandora meaning all gifted, was entrusted with a sealed jar, later misinterpreted as a box which contained the world's sufferings: disease, toil, sorrow, madness, envy, and death itself. Despite Prometheus's warnings, Epimetheus, ever naive, welcomed her into his home. Driven by the curiosity bestowed upon her by the gods, Pandora opened the jar, releasing chaos into the world, reminiscent of smoke escaping a long-contained fire. Humanity, which had briefly enjoyed peace, was now tormented by fate. Hunger gnawed at them, warfare drained their spirit, and age burdened their bodies. Yet hope remained trapped within the jar. Some claim it was an accident. Others believe it was intentional, a flickering light in the shadows. Nevertheless, Prometheus's own punishment had yet to unfold. For defying Olympus, Zeus commanded him to be shackled to a mountain at the edge of the world. Some say it was the Caucasus, while others suggest it lies lost in myth. Bound in unbreakable adamantine chains, he faced a daily torment where an eagle, either birthed from Typhon or sent by Zeus, would feast upon his liver, which grew back each night, ensuring his eternal suffering. Immortal, he endured for generations, long after empires rose and fell, and humans forgot their divine creators. Despite this, Prometheus showed no remorse. He held a secret that Zeus feared deeply. One day, the ruler of the gods would meet his downfall, not through warfare or insurrection, but through his own progeny. This knowledge shielded Prometheus from destruction, as Zeus could annihilate him only by discovering the identity of the woman destined to bear his doom. Thus, he remained waiting, unyielding, while humanity ignited fires in the dark and recounted tales of the one who dared to steal from the gods. Mortals played a crucial role in shaping the world. Though Zeus and Poseidon held dominion over sky and sea, it was the actions of mankind that infused the earth with both beauty and sorrow. Future poets would reflect on this extensive journey, recognizing not a singular humanity, but many, each born into distinct eras influenced by the blessings and retributions of the gods. Hesiod, the Boeotian farmer and poet, was the first to articulate these ages, segmenting the long trajectory of human existence into 5 clear epochs: golden, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron. Each was lesser than its predecessor, save for one, the Golden Age, unparalleled by any that followed, emerging during Cronus's reign, before the gods learned to fear rebellion, and before the burdens of iron and war tainted the earth. In those times, men lived freely like gods, untouched by suffering, age, or labor. The earth yielded abundance effortlessly, providing harvests in every season without the need for laws, kings, or currency. These early humans encountered no hunger, sickness, or sorrow. Upon their passing, they did not degrade or suffer, but drifted into eternal slumber. Their spirits became benevolent guardians, wandering as gentle daimons, protectors of justice and tranquility. Their existence was harmonious, representing the closest any mortal could approach Eden. However, as is the fate of all golden things, this age waned with Cronus's downfall and Zeus's ascent, ushering in the Silver Age, a time of lesser beauty and diminished virtue. These mortals, while tall and robust, lacked the wisdom and moderation of their golden predecessors. They indulged in childhood for a century, oblivious and spoiled, only to transition into violent and arrogant individuals who disregarded the gods and their commandments. They erected no temples and offered no tributes, openly defying the laws of Olympus, which led Zeus to punish them. Their souls did not ascend as guardians, but faded into the underworld, pale and forgotten. They embodied a race consumed by pride and disobedience, a tangible reflection of divine fears realized. The Bronze Age emerged from the ash trees, the same trees utilized for crafting weapons such as spears and shields. This was not an era defined by gentleness. These were formidable warriors, hardened by conflict. Their very beings were said to be intertwined with bronze, their homes and tools fashioned from the same metal, their hearts seemingly shaped from it as well. They lived for warfare and met their end in the same manner, leaving a legacy of bloodshed and ashes in their wake. Although they were fearsome, they were not malevolent, simply driven by the incessant beat of war drums and clashing weapons. They had no cities to construct, poems to write, or statues to carve. Upon death, they left behind only shattered blades and barren landscapes, and even the gods did not lament their absence. They descended into Hades without a ripple or prayer. However, the decline was not unvarying. From the carnage and smoke of the Bronze Age arose a fleeting yet brilliant illumination known as the Heroic Age, a unique period unlike any other. It did not signify a downslide, but rather a glorious interlude before a subsequent decline. The mortals of this time surpassed those before and after them. They were demigods, offspring of both gods and humans. They constructed cities, navigated oceans, and etched their legacies into the annals of history. This era featured the legendary tales of heroes such as Perseus, Heracles, Theseus, Atalanta, Jason and the Argonauts, Hector, Achilles, and Odysseus. They engaged in monumental battles against beasts, foreign rulers, and ultimately against each other in Troy. Many met untimely deaths, while others faded into obscurity. Yet, their narratives endured, preserved in songs, stones, epics, and prayers. Some found eternal rest among the blessed, dwelling peacefully beyond the horizon where heroes bask in sunlight. Although short-lived, the heroic age illuminated the world while it lasted. Then came what Hesiod referred to as his own age, the Iron Age, a time we continue to inhabit. This era is marked by sorrow and hardship, a world that has grown weary and burdened. Men now toil from sunrise to sunset, planting seeds in harsh soil, raising children amidst warfare and scarcity, and aging with discomfort and apprehension. In the Iron Age, bonds among friends, kin, and hosts deteriorate. Justice, once noble and radiant, now walks with averted eyes. Deceit is prevalent, promises are easily broken, and the gods, if they still observe, remain silent. In this time, while mortals erect towers, they neglect their forebears, pursuing wealth and power while depleting the forests that once nourished them. It is an era of struggle, and it is said that this too shall eventually pass. One day, the gods may entirely forsake humanity. One day, Zeus could unleash his thunderbolt, causing humankind to vanish like smoke. Nonetheless, the Iron Age persists. People continue to build, to harbor hopes, and to recount tales of an age when mortals were divine and the gods walked amongst them. And perhaps that hope, albeit delicate, is the one gift Zeus did not reclaim when Pandora opened the jar. In the twilight between the age of gods and that of men, a generation of extraordinary mortals emerged, unlike any that came before or would follow individuals born not merely from earth but infused with divine lineage, shaped by both Olympus and the mortal realm. These were the heroes. Their existences were brief, their destinies often harsh, yet their names would resound through time like distant thunder. Among the first and most prominent was Perseus, a notorious slayer of monsters, founder of dynasties, and the quintessential archetype of all future heroes. Perseus's journey commenced not in warfare, but in foreboding and prophecy. His mother, Danae, was a princess of Argos, a daughter to King Acrisius, who, fearful of Providence, acted on a cruel oracle's warning that his daughter's child would ultimately end his life. Unable to manipulate or negotiate with such prophecies, the king resorted to actions typical of rulers confronted by unchangeable truths. He imprisoned Danae within a bronze tower, entombed deep beneath the earth. Nevertheless, the gods, as is their tendency, found amusement in mortal schemes. In the guise of golden rain, Zeus breached the impenetrable walls to reach Danae in her solitude, resulting in the conception of Perseus. When Acrisius learned of the child's existence, he could not bear to spill noble blood directly, for even tyrants harbor trepidation towards divine retribution. Instead, he confined Danae and her newborn son in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, entrusting their fate to Poseidon or chance. The sea, however, is as capricious as fate itself. The chest did not sink as expected, but rather drifted across the dark-hued waves to the island of Seriphos, where a humble fisherman named Dictys retrieved it. He welcomed them into his home and raised Perseus as his own. As time passed, the boy grew tall and strong, embodying the nobility and fierce spirit of a king. Yet tranquility seldom lingers for those destined for greatness. King Polydex of Seriphos, captivated by Danae's beauty, desired her. Now grown into manhood, Perseus stood resolutely between his mother and the king, a steadfast barrier against his advances. Polyctus, constrained by his own sense of honor from directly attacking the son, opted for cunning instead of brute force. He fabricated a false engagement, rumored to be with Hippodamia, and demanded gifts from all men on the island. In response, Perseus, lacking gold or horses, declared that he would present the king with a far more remarkable prize: the head of Medusa, the mortal Gorgon capable of petrifying those who gazed upon her. This task was undoubtedly cruel, and Polyctus was aware of the danger, as none who had previously sought Medusa had returned alive. Medusa was one of 3 Gorgon sisters, the offspring of ancient sea deities, monstrous and winged beings with serpents for hair and cursed eyes. Only Medusa possessed mortality. Her sisters were immortal and posed great risks to anyone who tried to approach them. However, the gods, who closely observed human affairs, favored Perseus. Athena, who had sprung from her father's head and harbored a memory for slights, provided him with a shield that acted as a mirror, allowing him to view a Gorgon without meeting her gaze directly. Hermes, clever and quick, gifted him with a curved sword and winged sandals for flight, and guided him to the Gria, the Grey sisters who shared a single eye and had knowledge of the route to the Gorgon's lair. Using his cleverness, Perseus seized their eye and negotiated for valuable information. They informed him about the nymphs guarding essential items he would need: Hades' helm that granted invisibility, a kibasis, a magical bag to hold the Gorgon's head, and knowledge of the mysterious realm beyond the ocean where darkness reigned and the Gorgons rested among ancient stone. Equipped with these divine gifts, Perseus soared over seas and deserts until he reached the farthest edge of the world. There, he found Medusa and her sisters asleep in a shadowy grove, surrounded by the statues of previous adventurers. Avoiding a direct gaze, he used Athena's shield as a mirror while stepping cautiously backward until he stood above the slumbering Gorgon. With a single precise stroke, he severed her head, and from her blood emerged Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chryser, a warrior with a golden sword, both offspring of Poseidon, born in death. As her sisters shrieked in despair, Perseus faded into mist, concealed by the helmet of darkness, the deed accomplished. On his journey home, with the heavy prize safely in the sack, he passed the shores of Ethiopia, where a sea monster had been unleashed by the god to punish King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia for their arrogance. Their daughter, Andromeda, awaited sacrifice, chained to a rock. Enchanted by her beauty and purity, Perseus dispatched the beast, using the Gorgon's head to turn it to stone, and subsequently claimed her as his wife. She would accompany him westward, becoming the ancestor of his lineage. Upon his return to Serapis, Callictus ridiculed his tale. In response, Perseus revealed the severed head from the sack, instantly turning the king and his court into stone. Dictys, the fisherman who had shown compassion to a mother and child, ascended to the throne in Callictus's place. While the cycle of cruelty had seemingly ended for a time, prophecy is a tenacious force. Perseus journeyed to Argos, where King Acrisius, haunted by the oracle's words, fled rather than confront the boy he had condemned to death. Yet fate cannot be evaded. At a neighboring king's funeral games, while throwing a discus, Perseus accidentally struck an old man in the crowd, Acrisius, his grandfather dying without understanding that his death was no act of murder, but a prophecy fulfilled. Thus, the cycle closed. As it often does in myths, Perseus completed his destiny, not through malice but through valor. He vanquished a monster, rescued a maiden, established a royal lineage, and bore fate's burdens with grace. Though he would not enjoy immortality, his legacy would endure, as from his lineage would spring Heracles, the next significant chapter in the saga of gods and men. If Perseus was the initial great hero, Heracles rose to be the mightiest. His name resonated like the thunder that rolls over faraway mountains, carrying significant weight across all lands touched by the Hellenic spirit. He wasn't just strong. He embodied a larger-than-life presence, existing on the threshold between humanity and divinity, joy and sorrow, victory and defeat. He was the great-grandson of Perseus, a son of Argus, and the offspring of Zeus. Though the gods bestowed strength upon him, they also burdened him with immense suffering. His very conception was a manipulation of time itself. Zeus, driven by desire, took the form of Alcmene's husband, Amphitryon, and spent a night with her that was transformed into threefold duration. This union resulted in Heracles and a twin, Iphicles, who was mortal. Hera, perched on her throne, observed with resentment, fully aware of her husband's infidelities and the potential threat this divine child posed to her reign. Even as an infant, Heracles exhibited extraordinary gifts. Hera, intent on ending his life prematurely, dispatched 2 serpents into his crib, but the child managed to capture and strangle both serpents before a nurse could intervene. From that moment onward, his reputation began to grow. In his youth, he honed skills fitting a nobleman, including music, archery, wrestling, and chariot racing. Nonetheless, a wild spirit lingered within him, a restlessness that no teacher could contain. Adulthood brought both love and devastation. After marrying Megara, the daughter of Theban king Creon, he initially experienced peace, raising sons and protecting his city. However, Hera's lingering jealousy erupted into madness, causing him to slaughter his wife and children with the very hands that had once cared for them. When sanity returned and he saw the destruction he had wrought, his cries for help went unanswered by the gods. To seek redemption, he consulted the oracle of Delphi, where the Pythia conveyed that he must submit to the will of Eurystheus, his cousin, who was weaker in strength but stronger in destiny. Only through servitude and hardship could Heracles find forgiveness. This led to the commencement of the 12 labors, tasks so formidable that they captured the attention of the gods. The first labor required him to kill the Nemean lion, a creature whose golden skin was impenetrable. Heracles cornered it in its lair and ultimately choked it to death with his bare hands. He then skinned the lion using its own claw and wore the hide as armor, providing him additional protection. The second labor involved the Lernaean Hydra, a serpent with 9 heads, 2 of which would regenerate when severed. With the aid of his nephew Iolaus, who cauterized the wounds, Heracles fought the Hydra in its swampy home. He ultimately extracted its immortal blood to poison his arrows, making them lethal even to the gods. The third labor tasked him with capturing the Cyrenian hind, a golden-horned deer sacred to Artemis. After pursuing it for a year across various terrains, he achieved the difficult feat of capturing it alive, gaining Artemis's reluctant approval. For the fourth labor, he faced the Erymanthian boar, a monstrous creature of the wilderness. Heracles tackled it amid the snowy Arcadian heights and returned it to Eurystheus secured in chains, delighting in the king's fright as he cowered in a bronze jar. The fifth task was less glorious. He had to clean the Augean stables, which housed thousands of cattle that had gone without cleaning for many years. Using his ingenuity, Heracles diverted 2 rivers to wash away the filth in a single day. The sixth labor involved driving off the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures equipped with bronze beaks and razor-sharp wings. He startled them into flight with the help of Athena's rattle and shot them down from the sky. For the seventh labor, he traveled west to capture the Cretan bull, a divine creature that had sired the Minotaur. Heracles managed to wrestle it and brought it back alive, even as the bull's frantic gaze burned with fury. The eighth labor took him to Thrace, where he tamed the man-eating horses of Diomedes, feeding their master to them, which rendered them docile. The ninth labor called for both diplomacy and force. Tasked with retrieving the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, he found her willing to surrender it peacefully. However, Hera spread discord among the Amazons, resulting in battle. In the end, Heracles killed Hippolyta and escaped with the belt. The 10th labor led him to the edges of the known world in Erythea to steal the cattle of Geryon, a 3-bodied giant. He fought against the giant, his herdsman, and his fierce dog simultaneously before successfully driving the red cattle back across the continents. Eurystheus, attempting to undermine Heracles, dismissed 2 of his labors as invalid, alleging that Iris had assisted him with the Hydra and that others had aided him with the stables. This meant that Heracles had to complete 2 additional tasks. The 11th labor involved stealing the golden apples from the Hesperides, which were protected by nymphs and a dragon coiled around the base of the tree. Heracles cleverly tricked Atlas, the bearer of the heavens, into fetching the apples while he temporarily supported the sky. As Atlas sought to leave him with the burden, Heracles asked for a brief moment to adjust his cloak and seize the opportunity to reclaim the heavens, escaping with the apples. The 12th and final labor was particularly daunting. He had to journey into Hades and return with Cerberus, the fearsome 3-headed dog. Equipped only with his extraordinary strength, Heracles ventured into the underworld, presented himself to Hades, and, with the god's grim consent, subdued Cerberus before leading the beast back to the living world. Completing this labor marked Heracles' redemption, yet his life remained tumultuous. He engaged in further battles, married multiple times, and fathered several children. However, Hera's animosity persisted. Ultimately, it was not a monster or weapon that claimed his life, but the poisoned blood of the centaur Nessus, which was mistakenly smeared on a tunic given to him by his wife, Deianira, who thought it would ensure his love. As the poison ravaged his body, Heracles constructed his own pyre on Mount Oda. No mortal dared to light it until Philoctetes, a humble shepherd, stepped forward. In gratitude, he was gifted the hero's bow. Though Heracles perished in flames, he was reborn in death, as Zeus took him to Olympus, granting him immortality and marrying him to Hebe, the goddess of youth. He evolved from a mere hero into a deity, and his labors, steeped in sorrow and guilt, became symbolic of true heroism. While others were remembered through tales, Heracles was honored with shrines and celebratory games, and in the hearts of men who aspired to greatness. If Heracles was the epitome of Greek heroism, Theseus represented cunning, political acumen, and the essence of humanity. He was not only a beast slayer or curse breaker, but also a city builder and lawmaker, embodying the spirit of Athens, which would soon be recognized as the cradle of civilization. His narrative intertwines myth with historical significance, resonating with the tales of heroes and political maneuvering. Within him existed both physical prowess and intellectual clarity, capturing the duality of a nation that revered Athena, armed with a spear and wearing an olive wreath. Theseus had 2 fathers, King Aegeus of Athens and Poseidon, the sea god. His mother, Aethra, had lain with both men on the same night, one mortal, the other divine. From this union emerged a boy destined for greatness, raised away from Athens in Trojan, oblivious to his noble lineage. Before departing, Aegeus concealed a sword and sandals beneath a heavy stone, instructing Aethra that when their son was strong enough to lift it, he was ready to claim his birthright. As he grew, Theseus became tall and sharp-eyed, restless in body and mind. At 16, he lifted the stone with ease, seizing his father's tokens. While many would have opted for the shorter sea route to Athens, Theseus chose the longer, more treacherous path, believing that true kingship is earned rather than inherited. Thus commenced his 6 labors, which, while not as grand as Heracles' trials, were profound and personal, each addressing a menace of the road that troubled ordinary people. He defeated Periphetes, the club wielder, taking his weapon as a trophy. He vanquished Sinis, who would tie travelers to bent pine trees before tearing them apart. He cast Siren from the cliffs into the sea, ending the tyranny of a man who forced wayfarers to wash his feet before kicking them to their doom. He outsmarted the restless Circean, using technique over brute strength, and Procrustes, who altered his guest beds to fit them, met his end in the same cruel frame. Theseus did not merely survive. He cleared the land as he progressed, laying the groundwork for Athens' emergence. Upon reaching Athens, King Aegeus failed to recognize him. Queen Medea, Aegeus' wife, and harboring resentment from ancient spells, perceived a threat in the young man and urged the king to poison him. However, when Theseus displayed the sword and sandals, Aegeus cast aside the cup of poison, embracing his son before the court. Yet, like many myths, joy was fleeting. Dangers loomed from the east, as Athens had long suffered under a bitter tribute following a defeat in war against the island of Crete. King Minos demanded the city send 7 young men and 7 maidens every 9 years to appease the Minotaur. A monstrous half-man, born from lust and vengeance, was confined in a winding labyrinth beneath the palace at Nas. This creature originated from Minos' arrogance. When Poseidon sent a bull from the sea, Minos was supposed to sacrifice it but chose to keep it for himself instead. As retribution, the gods cursed his wife, Pace, to fall in love with the beast, resulting in the birth of the Minotaur. Known as Asterius, he was horned and savage, an embodiment of shame, trapped within a maze crafted by the ingenious Daedalus. Learning about the required tribute, Theseus volunteered among the selected few. He would not go as a victim, but rather as a hunter. Before he left, he pledged to his father that if he triumphed, he would return with white sails on his ship. If he failed, the sails would be black. Upon reaching Crete, fate intervened yet again. Ariadne, Minos' daughter and the Minotaur's half-sister, fell in love with Theseus upon seeing him. She provided him with a gift of thread, revealing the secret to navigating the labyrinth's complex paths. That night, Theseus entered the maze, where he eventually confronted the beast. They clashed silently, a prince against a nightmare. With skill and a sharpened blade, Theseus defeated the creature and retraced his steps, using the thread back to the light. He escaped with Ariadne and the freed Athenians, setting sail across the Aegean Sea. However, tales of love in Greek mythology are seldom straightforward. On the island of Naxos, Theseus deserted Ariadne. Some narratives suggest Dionysus claimed her, while others propose Theseus feared the implications of a Cretan bride for Athenian politics. Alone, she awoke under strange stars and wept. Meanwhile, Theseus journeyed home, but in his grief or absent-mindedness, he neglected to change the sails. Upon spotting the black sails from the cliffs of Athens, King Aegeus assumed his son had perished, succumbing to despair and casting himself into the sea, which bears his name, the Aegean. After becoming king, Theseus continued to act. He unified Attica, the region surrounding Athens, merging its villages into one city-state. He instituted festivals, games, temples, and laws, becoming a hero of governance as well as combat. He frequently ventured into legendary encounters, fighting alongside Heracles against the Amazons and descending into the underworld with his reckless companion, Pirithous, to abduct Persephone from Hades, a quest that ended in failure. Pirithous was consumed by the earth, and Theseus found himself ensnared on the chair of forgetfulness, his memory drained by the underworld. Only Heracles, during his own journey, managed to rescue him. Yet time is ever in flux. Eventually, the Athenians, weary of kings and influenced by new heroes and philosophies, exiled Theseus. He sought refuge on the island of Scyros, where he was betrayed by a jealous king and thrown from a cliff. His remains would later be collected by the Athenians and interred with honor, but he died in solitude without a crowd, a crown, or a chorus. Nevertheless, his legacy lived on. While Heracles symbolized physical strength, Theseus represented the strength of community, governance, and the bonds that unite people beyond mere blood ties. Athens flourished upon his legacy, and though it would revere Athena, it would not forget the king who laid its foundations. Long before the flames of Troy and after the Titan's demise, a remarkable voyage unfolded, one that traversed continents and deities, forged brotherhood among heroes, and culminated in betrayal and exile. It was a saga filled with dragons and oaths, about usurped kings and reclaimed thrones. At the heart of this tale stood Jason, a prince who faced exile in his youth, not shaped by war or prophecy, but rather by a slow-burning desire for revenge. His story commenced in Aeolkos, a coastal kingdom in Thessaly, where his father had been overthrown by his own brother, Peleus, a man who revered power above all else. Fearing the boy who might one day challenge him, Peleus sought to eliminate Jason at birth. However, a forewarning from the goddess saved the infant, who was secretly smuggled away and raised by the knowledgeable centaur Chiron Mentor to heroes like Achilles and Asclepius. Growing strong in the wilderness, Jason thrived on a diet of honey and wisdom, his body forged through hunting and his mind enriched by tales of fallen and risen kings. As the years passed, Jason returned as a man wearing a single sandal. As he crossed the Anarus River, Jason lost one of his sandals in the muddy waters while helping an elderly woman, who unbeknownst to him was Hera in disguise, testing his character. Upon entering the city, Pallas immediately recognized the one-sandaled stranger and grew anxious, recalling the oracle's warning, "Beware the man who comes with one shoe." Jason, confident yet wise, refrained from drawing his sword or causing a scene, and simply stated that he was the son of Aeson and rightful heir. Understanding the significance of the situation, Pallas pretended to welcome him but proposed a challenge. If Jason wished to be king, he had to retrieve the golden fleece from the distant land of Colchis. This precious fleece had once belonged to a ram that carried Phrixus across the sea to safety. In gratitude, Phrixus had sacrificed the ram and hung its golden fleece, shining like fire, on an oak tree in a sacred grove, heavily guarded by serpents and overseen by King Aetes, Helios' son. No Greek had ever ventured there and returned, but Jason accepted the challenge. He called upon the greatest heroes of his era to accompany him, not as soldiers, but as volunteers in search of glory. Among them were Heracles, Orpheus with his lyre, Atalanta the huntress, Castor and Pollux, sons of Zeus, and others, totaling 50 heroes. They set sail on the Argo, a ship crafted by Argus under Athena's guidance, featuring sacred oak from Dodona in its prow, which could speak prophecies. With the ship acting almost as a character itself, they journeyed eastward, facing legendary trials. Their first challenges were human rather than monstrous. On Lemnos, they encountered a matriarchal society that had killed their husbands. During this time, Jason had a brief liaison with Hypsipyle, the queen, fathering sons he would never see grow up. In Thrace, they met the blind seer Phineus, who suffered from the harpies plaguing him. The winged Boreads drove the harpies away, earning his guidance through the perilous clashing rocks. Following his advice, They released a dove, which successfully navigated through, losing only a tail feather. The Argo followed swiftly, though the rocks grazed her stern. Thereafter, the passage remained calm, seemingly respectful of those brave enough to challenge it. Eventually, they reached Colchis, known for its fire and iron. King Ates didn't execute them immediately, respecting strangers, an ancient cultural norm, but agreed to grant Jason the fleece if he completed 3 near-impossible tasks: yoke fire-breathing bulls, plow a field, sow it with dragon's teeth, and defeat the arising warriors. These were not mere challenges of bravery, but of the impossible. However, divine intervention soon came. At the behest of Hecate, Eris struck Ates' daughter, Medea, with a love arrow. Unaccustomed to men and icy like moonlight, she unexpectedly fell for Jason. Medea provided Jason with a protective potion against the flames, instructed him on how to incite chaos among the earthborn warriors, and ultimately helped him reach the fleece, which was guarded by a serpent that never slept. With her incantations, Medea lulled the serpent into a deep sleep, allowing Jason to seize the fleece, soft and radiant as molten gold, leading them to escape into the night. Ates pursued them by ship, but they managed to buy time through sorcery and sacrifice as Medea killed her young brother Absyrtus, dismembering him and scattering his parts at sea to distract her father. Bloodstained and enchanted, the Argo quietly evaded capture. Their return journey involved navigating the dangers of Scylla and Charybdis before finally arriving at Iolcus. Yet, Pallas still refused to relinquish the crown. In revenge, Medea deceived his daughters into murdering him and preparing his body as a supposed rejuvenation spell. Outraged, the populace rose against Jason, who became tainted by treachery and was exiled, eventually seeking refuge in Corinth, where he and Medea lived for several years in a tense tranquility. In his quest for validation, Jason chose to dismiss Medea and instead wed a princess from Corinth. Medea, feeling betrayed and vengeful, exacted a cruel retribution. She poisoned the gown of Jason's bride, resulting in her fiery death, and then killed her own sons with Jason. Fleeing the consequences of her actions, she was spirited away in a chariot drawn by dragons, a gift from her grandfather Helios. Meanwhile, Jason returned to Iolcus, heartbroken and forgotten, spending his last days wandering through the ruins of a once great life. One fateful day, while resting beneath the now decaying Argo, a dislodged beam struck him down, marking the end of the once esteemed hero, not through a glorious battle, but in quiet solitude beneath the remnants of his past. Yet the legend of Jason lingered on, encapsulating the adventures for the fleece, the gathering of heroes, love's bitterness, and the downfall of ambition, thus becoming one of Greece's most enduring myths. Very few bloodlines in Greek mythology are as notorious as that of the royal house of Thebes. Unlike many heroes who fought monsters or sought distant thrones, the Theban kings battled their own bloodline and confronted their own histories. Their legacy is not etched in stone or celebrated in song, but is instead written in enigmas, madness, and murder. The foundation of their city was itself rooted in ill omens. The tale begins with Cadmus, a Phoenician prince and brother to Europa, who embarked on a quest to find his sister after Zeus abducted her disguised as a white bull. Failing to locate her, Cadmus consulted the oracle at Delphi, who advised him to abandon the search and follow a cow until it lay down, where he was to establish a city. He complied and eventually found the animal resting on a hill. However, when he sent his companions for water, they fell victim to a serpent sacred to Ares that guarded the spring. Cadmus faced the serpent and killed it. At Athena's urging, he planted the serpent's teeth into the soil. From these teeth emerged armed warriors, known as the Spartoi, who fought among themselves until only 5 survived. These 5 became the noble families of Thebes, with Cadmus as their king. However, slaying the serpent incurred Ares' wrath, and Cadmus was condemned to serve the war god for 8 years. Eventually, he wed Harmonia, daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, and at their wedding, even the gods were present. The couple received a necklace cursed by Hephaestus, a beautiful item that would bring misfortune to its wearers. Thus, the doom of the thieves began not from animosity, but through a celebration marred by beauty and blood. As generations flew by, misfortunes plagued Cadmus' descendants. Ino descended into madness and cast her child into the sea. Actaeon, the son of Otno, met a tragic end at the jaws of his own hounds for catching a glimpse of Artemis bathing. Semele, favored by Zeus, tragically demanded his true form from him, leading to her fiery demise. Agave, driven mad by Dionysus, mutilated her son Pentheus, mistaking him for a lion. The true tragedy, however, unfolded through Cadmus' great-grandson, Laius, who ascended as king of Thebes and married Jocasta. But the gods' anger lingered over Cadmus' lineage. An oracle foretold that if Laius had a son, he would kill his father and marry his mother. As is common in Greek myths, the warning went unheeded. Laius and Jocasta had a son, leading Laius to order the infant's ankles to be bound and given to a servant to abandon on Mount Cithaeron. The compassionate servant, instead, entrusted him to a shepherd, who presented the child to the childless king and queen of Corinth, Polybus and Merope. They named him Oedipus, meaning swollen foot, and never disclosed his true heritage. Oedipus matured into an intelligent and proud young man, but whispers about his origin reached him. In pursuit of the truth, he visited Delphi, where the oracle repeated the prophecy given to Laius. He would kill his father and marry his mother. Distressed and thinking Polybus and Merope were his biological parents, Oedipus fled Corinth, unknowingly running toward his destiny. Along the way, he encountered an older man at a crossroads near Delphi, resulting in a conflict over the right-of-way. In a fit of rage, Oedipus killed the man and his attendants, unaware that he had just slain his biological father, Laius. Continuing to Thebes, he found the city besieged, not by an army, but by the Sphinx, a creature with the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman who devoured anyone unable to solve her riddle. The challenge was, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? Without hesitation, Oedipus answered, man. Defeated, the Sphinx took her own life by jumping off a cliff. Thebes celebrated, hailing Oedipus as their savior and declaring him king, rewarding him with the widow queen as his wife, Jocasta, unaware of their true relationship. Time passed, and Oedipus ruled justly, fathering 4 children. Eteocles, Polynces, Antigone, and Ismene faced misfortune when a plague struck Thebes, leading the oracle to declare the land cursed due to unavenged blood. As grim truths emerged, the stories of an old man at the crossroads, the queen's sorrow, the servant who endured, and the blind prophet Tiresias surfaced, revealing the king's intertwined identities as father, brother, son, and husband. In despair, Jocasta took her life, while Oedipus, in his grief, blinded himself with her brooches. Seeking exile, he roamed as a pathetic figure, reliant on Antigone for guidance, until he found solace in the hills near Colonus, where he met a tranquil end, his grave a secret known only to the gods. Unfortunately, his children could not escape the family curse. Idols and Polynces clashed over the throne. Exiled Polyneices rallied an army from Argos to attack Thebes, resulting in a bloody conflict. The brothers ultimately killed each other at the city's gates. Although Thebes survived, its spirit was crushed. Antigone, the last to uphold the family's honor, defied royal edict to give her brother a proper burial, leading to her imprisonment and death by entombment. Madness and death descended upon Creon's household as divine retribution. The kingdom endured, but its leadership became a cycle of despair. The story of Oedipus is not one of vanquished monsters or flourishing cities. Rather, it narrates the inescapable nature of fate, illustrating how a person might strive to evade a prophecy yet end up fulfilling it. It's a tragedy arising not from malevolence but from ignorance, centering on one man's quest for truth that ultimately resulted in his devastation. The House of Thebes, despite its former splendor, was founded on treachery and enigmas, with no riddle, however cleverly resolved, able to alter the will of the gods. Among all wars that have ravaged the mortal realm, none resonate more profoundly than the one sparked by a woman's allure. It was a conflict rooted in pledges, beauty, treachery, and the clashes of deities and kings which led to the downfall of empires. This war did not commence with weapons or flames, but with a wedding, attended by every god except one. Eris, the goddess of discord, was not invited to the union of Pallas and Thetis, the sea nymph destined to give birth to a son who would surpass his father. Enraged, Eris threw a golden apple inscribed with words that could dismantle kingdoms into the banquet. The apple appealed to Hea, Athena, and Aphrodite, each convinced of her own superiority. To resolve the conflict, they approached a mortal shepherd prince, Paris, the exiled son of King Priam of Troy, who bore an omen that he would incinerate his birthplace. The gods convened on Mount Ida, presenting their offers. Hera promised dominion over all men. Athena offered wisdom and victory in battle, while Aphrodite, with her electrifying charm, enticed him with the love of the world's most beautiful woman. Paris chose love, marking him and Helen of Sparta, daughter of Zeus and later wife to Minos. Helen was pursued not only for her beauty by many suitors, kings, and princes from across Achaea, but also for the powerful bloodlines linking her to Olympus. To quell the anticipated war, her mortal father, King Tyndareus, under Odysseus' counsel, compelled the suitors to an oath to protect the chosen union against any challenger. This pact, made in jest, bound more than mere men. It intertwined their destinies. Minos, the brother of Agamemnon, ultimately gained her affection. Their reign in Sparta was fair and strong. Yet when Paris arrived, ostensibly for peace and sanctioned hospitality, he encountered Helen, the embodiment of Aphrodite's promise. The circumstances of her departure, whether she left willingly or was kidnapped, remain subjects of debate among poets. But upon Paris's return across the Aegean with Helen, the war ignited. Fueled by rage, Minos invoked the sacred oath, and all those who had pledged their loyalty rallied. Among them were Odysseus of Ithaca, who was clever yet reluctant, Meester, the elder sage of Pelos, the formidable Ajax the Greater, swift Ajax the Lesser, brave Diomedes of Argos, and steadfast Idomeneus of Crete, warriors and rulers gathered from the far reaches of Hellas, except for two: Odysseus, feigning madness by salting his fields until a clever envoy presented his infant son before the plow. Achilles, the son of Thetis, was concealed by his mother among the daughters of Lycomedes, dressed in fine silk to avoid a fate she foresaw. However, the Greeks discovered him, led by Odysseus, who deceived Achilles with gifts of jewelry while presenting a spear and shield. Ultimately, he chose the path of war. They assembled at Aulis, 1,000 ships gleaming with bronze, sails billowing like thunderclouds, yet the winds failed to rise. The fleet remained at a standstill, causing the men to grow restless. It became apparent, through prophetic insights, that Artemis had been wronged, possibly by a boast or a hunted stag, and that only a significant sacrifice could appease her. The name brought forth was Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon. Tales circulated of lies woven to lure her to Aulis under the pretense of marriage to Achilles, of her heartbroken mother, Clytemnestra, and the moment the blade fell, or of a last-minute rescue with Artemis whisking her away and substituting a deer. Nevertheless, in many versions, the blood was genuine, and the gods witnessed as the king sacrificed his own daughter for the sake of war. With this act, the winds returned, and the fleet sailed eastward, marking a transformation in the world. The Greeks landed on Trojan soil, not as invaders, but as enforcers of judgment. For a decade, they would camp before the walls of Ilium, ruled by Priam and defended by his sons noble and doomed Hector, beautiful yet fragile Paris, Deiphobus, Helenus, among others. The gods took sides. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon aligned with the Greeks, while Aphrodite, Ares, Apollo, and Artemis supported the Trojans. Only Zeus sought to remain neutral, though he too was eventually influenced by fate and family ties. This was not the war depicted in Homer's Iliad, which would unfold in its 10th year. Yet the conflict had already commenced, not solely through weapons and strongholds, but through the betrayal of oaths, the destruction of trust, the sacrifice of daughters, and the verdicts of deities. This war stemmed from love, pride, divine envy, human arrogance, ancient curses, and deep-seated fears. It concluded not in triumph, but in flames. By the time Homer's Iliad starts, the Trojan War had already persisted for 9 years. The Greeks, once vibrant and fierce as they crossed the Aegean, had settled into a grim routine of lay siege and survival. What began in fury and flames had turned into something colder and more desperate. They constructed grim, fortified camps along the coastline, secured their ships upon the beach, and sent out raiding parties day after day, not only to fight but also to sustain their troops. The conflict dragged on like a persistent wound that refused to heal, and both sides felt its deepening affliction. The Trojans, safe behind their formidable walls, reportedly built by Poseidon and the mortal builder Apollo serving in penance, endured their suffering. Outside their city, the fields had long been trampled. New allies emerged from the east and north, with Sarpedon of Lycia, Memnon of Ethiopia, and others reinvigorating the ancient cause. Yet the Greeks refused to retreat without Helen. Their pride, as much as their oaths, anchored them there, turning the war into a legacy of its own. However, war resides not in fortifications or ships, but in the hearts of men, and in this conflict, 2 souls burned brightest. Agamemnon, the king of kings, imperious and stern, and Achilles, the unmatched warrior destined for a short life, but resolved to make his death significant. Their dispute would fracture the fragile Greek alliance, igniting, as many conflicts do, over a woman. During one of their countless raids, the Greeks captured several women, including Chrysis, daughter of a priest of Apollo, and Briseis, a princess of Lyrnessus. Chrysis was awarded to Agamemnon, while Briseis went to Achilles. When Chrysis' father came to ransom her, cloaked in gifts and reverent words, Agamemnon rejected him. The elder then prayed to Apollo, and the god responded not with fire, but with a lethal plague that spread from cattle to men, tainting the air with death. Eventually, the seer Calchas revealed the reason for this wrath. Agamemnon had to return Chrysis to save his army, but he demanded Briseis from Achilles as compensation, a slight Achilles found intolerable. Furious, he left the council, labeled Agamemnon a greedy coward, and swore an oath before the gods to no longer fight for the Greeks, saying they'd bleed without him. He retreated to his tent, taking with him the Myrmidons, his elite fighters, who were silent and lethal, forged for battle. From that point on, the balance shifted. With Achilles absent, the Greeks began to suffer. The Trojans intensified their assault. Leading the charge was Hector, son of Priam and the mightiest warrior of Troy, characterized by a calm yet fierce determination. Unlike Paris, who instigated the conflict, or other warriors seeking fame, Hector embodied the spirit of the city. As a husband, father, and prince, he bore the weight of his people's struggles with a sense of duty rather than pride. Gradually, the Trojans forced the Greeks back toward the sea, setting ships on fire as heroes succumbed in battle. Protoileus, the first Greek to land, had perished early on. Now, Patroclus, a close companion of Achilles, watched the rising casualties with increasing despair. Some described Patroclus as a friend, while others suggested a deeper bond, but all acknowledged that he alone could reach Achilles amid his sorrow and rage. When the Trojans breached the Greek defenses, threatening to incinerate the ships, Patroclus implored Achilles to allow him to fight in his place. He donned the hero's armor, commandeered a chariot, and led the Myrmidons into battle, briefly rallying the Greeks. However, emboldened by borrowed valor, Patroclus advanced too far and confronted Hector at the gates of Troy, where he met his end beneath Hector's spear. His death shattered whatever peace lingered within Achilles. Upon learning of Patroclus' demise, Achilles' grief erupted. He did not weep like a man, but howled as if he were a wrathful storm god. He returned to the fray not for honor or oaths, but for vengeance. His mother, Thetis, presented him with new armor crafted by Hephaestus himself, bronze that shone brilliantly, and a shield etched with scenes from history. Achilles waged war with unparalleled ferocity, decimating foes as chariots overturned and blood stained the earth. He pursued Hector 3 times around the walls of Troy before they finally engaged in direct combat. Although Hector fought valiantly, he could not withstand Achilles' unquenchable fury. After striking Hector down, Achilles desecrated his body by dragging it behind his chariot around the city, denying the fallen prince a proper burial. Ultimately, it was Priam, the aged king of Troy, who put an end to this madness. Under the cover of night, and guided by Hermes, he approached Achilles' camp, kneeling before him and kissing the hands that had slain his son. Speaking not as a monarch but as a father, Priam urged Achilles, who finally wept, to return Hector's body and grant safe passage. For a fleeting moment, an uneasy silence settled over the war. However, peace was short-lived. Achilles' fate was sealed. A poisoned arrow, some say shot by Paris, others by Apollo, struck his heel, the only vulnerable spot on his body. He fell in the dust, young and unmatched, as the war carried on in his absence. The Iliad concludes not with Troy's downfall, but with a funeral and a shared sorrow. Yet the war remained. The gods were not done, nor were the Greeks, and the fabled wooden horse was yet to be wrought. Despite the bloodshed, the landscape was withered, and 10 years of siege had turned warriors into shadows, kings into phantoms, and heroes into fading memories. Troy, once radiant, now stood behind its walls like an aged lion surrounded by wolves. One by one, the sons of Priam fell: Hector, the city's protector, slain by Achilles; Troilus, killed while still a youth; and Polydorus, betrayed and murdered. The Trojans fought with the desperation of those defending not just their territory, but their history, enduring year after year as the Greeks grew weary beside their smoldering fires. Just as the gods shifted their attention, the Greeks disappeared. At dawn, the Trojans ascended their towers to find the sea empty of ships. In their place stood a massive wooden horse, towering like a temple, crafted from smooth cedar and adorned in Poseidon's honor. No soldiers stirred, no weapons clashed, suggesting that the war had ended quietly. However, Troy was not quick to celebrate. Priam, cautious in his old age, doubted what he saw. Others urged prudence, yet it was Sinon, a clever Greek left behind, who unraveled the city's fate. Posing as a deserter, he spun a tale so masterfully deceptive that it could rival Odysseus himself. He claimed the horse was a tribute to Athena, a peace offering left once the Greeks had departed, ensuring the Trojans' greatness for generations. Conversely, he warned that destroying it would bring calamity. Only Laocoon, Poseidon's priest, recognized the truth, cautioning against trusting Greeks bearing gifts, and hurled a spear into the horse's flank. The wood creaked ominously. Something shifted within. Yet at that moment, as if the gods had grown tired of issuing warnings, 2 colossal sea serpents emerged from the water, crushing Laocoon and his sons in their coils. The onlooking Trojans interpreted this as an omen, recalling how they had previously spurned the gods' gift. They would not repeat their actions. With ropes and wheels, accompanied by cheers and songs, they brought the horse into their city. That night, as the city celebrated and the fires faded to embers, a trapdoor in the horse creaked open ominously. Out emerged Odysseus, Minos, Nautomus, Diomedes, and others, specifically chosen for their cruelty and cleverness. Simultaneously, the Greek fleet, hidden nearby on the Isle of Tenedos, crept back stealthily under the cover of darkness. Troy lay in slumber. What unfolded was not merely a battle but a massacre. Neoptolemus, the descendant of Achilles, surged through the palace like a dark storm. He murdered Priam at Zeus's altar, bathing the stones in the old king's blood. Cassandra, Priam's daughter and a cursed prophet, was dragged from Athena's temple, her warnings ignored once more. Hecuba, the queen of Troy, witnessed her sons perish and her city engulfed in flames. The Greeks showed no mercy. Astyanax, Hector's infant son, was cast from the walls to ensure he would never draw breath again. Temples were profaned, women abducted, and the once magnificent city of Troy was reduced to ashes. Helen, whose beauty had started 1,000 ships sailing, was discovered in the palace. Some report she cried and pleaded for forgiveness, while others say she remained unbowed by despair. Minos, with his sword drawn, gazed into her eyes and lowered his weapon. He returned her to Sparta, marking the war's ultimate triumph. When dawn broke over the plain, all that remained were smoke, ash. The walls had crumbled. The gods turned away, but the aftermath of the war was far from tidy. The victors carried their own misfortunes. Ajax the Lesser, who violated Cassandra in Athena's temple, was drowned at sea. Agamemnon, arriving home with Cassandra as his concubine, was slain in his bath by his wife Clytemnestra. The house of Atreus continued its cycle of bloodshed. Minos and Helen returned to Sparta, yet their reputations were tarnished forever. Diomedes, Nestor, and others faded into obscurity or exile. Odysseus, cursed by Poseidon, faced a decade of trials before reaching home, his journey transforming into a storied odyssey filled with shipwrecks and creatures, molded by divine intervention and loss. Only Aeneas, son of Anchises and Aphrodite, managed to escape Troy, carrying his father on his back and leading his son by the hand. Guided by prophecies and stars, he carried Troy's final hope westward toward Italy. From his lineage, the Romans would later claim emerged Romulus and Remus, establishing a legacy even greater than Troy. The fall of Troy marked not just the collapse of a city, but the conclusion of an epoch, the age of heroes, wherein men mingled with deities, where glory overshadowed peace and destiny was etched in flesh and stone. The wooden horse, the fire, the betrayals, the mourning women, they formed the last notes of a melody that began with an apple and ended in devastation. The walls that withstood a decade of siege fell within a single night, and the ashes of Troy were carried away, as if indifferent to the victor's triumph. The fall of Troy was not the end of the tale, but rather the prologue to a different tragedy, one not waged on open battlegrounds or within fortified cities, but upon turbulent seas and within the disintegrating halls of once mighty rulers. For the war's survivors, their return home would prove to be far more dangerous than the conflict itself. The gods, unsatisfied by the sacking of Troy, unleashed their wrath upon the victors. The winds that once transported them to battle now scattered them across the globe. Agamemnon, the High King, was the first to return, or at least it seemed so. He sailed back alongside Cassandra, the Trojan prophetess he had taken as a concubine, bearing gifts, tales, and the shadow of a severe misdeed. The gods had not forgotten the sacrifice of Iphigenia, his daughter, murdered to appease Artemis before the war's onset. In Mycenae, Clytemnestra, queen, mother, and widow in spirit, had not forgotten either. She had taken a lover during Agamemnon's absence, Aegisthus, a cousin seeking his own revenge from the cursed house of Atreus. Together, they schemed murder beneath the roof built by Agamemnon. Upon his weary return, he stepped into the palace, blissfully unaware of the trap. Some say he was killed while bathing. Others claim Clytemnestra ensnared him in a robe before striking him down with an axe. Cassandra, too, met her end, screaming in unheard language. Clytemnestra, bloodied and unrepentant, stood over her husband's dead body and deemed the act just. In that household, the tradition of vengeance persisted. Eventually, retribution came to pass. Orestes, the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, returned from exile and killed both his mother and her lover, spurred on by Apollo and tormented by the Furies, ancient goddesses who inflicted madness on those guilty of kinslaying. His story, marked by bloodshed and redemption, would resonate in Athenian courts and myths for generations to come. However, he was not the only one facing a twisted fate. Menelaus and Helen were also affected by divine forces, drifting across the sea towards Egypt due to unfavorable winds. Some accounts suggest that the Helen who journeyed to Troy was merely an illusion, while the actual Helen remained in Egypt untouched by time as a war was fought over her likeness. Other narratives propose that she eloped with Paris willingly and that Menelaus, weary of conflict, forgave her. Eventually, they returned to Sparta, ruling together in a tense silence. Yet, Helen's name, once revered, became a source of shame, and Sparta would never recover to its former glory. But it was Odysseus whose journey became the most legendary, filled with sorrow and endurance. After Troy, he left for a 10-year struggle at sea, caught between Poseidon's wrath and the whims of fate. No innocent, Odysseus had orchestrated the wooden horse and instigated the fall of Troy, angering the gods and particularly invoking Poseidon's ire. His ship was tossed from one peculiar island to another. He blinded the Cyclops Polyphemus, Poseidon's son, escaping under the guise of nobody. He encountered Circe, the sorceress who transformed his crew into pigs, and Calypso, the nymph who kept him as her lover for 7 long years. He ventured to the underworld to converse with the dead and experience the siren song, bound to the mast while his men blocked their ears with wax. Navigating between Scylla and Charybdis, he lost all his men to storms and mistakes, ultimately washing ashore alone on the island of the Phaeacians, who, moved by his tale, granted him a ship for safe passage. Finally, he returned to Ithaca in tattered clothing, his beard unkempt and eyes cold. In his absence, suitors had invaded his home, feasting and conspiring to marry his wife, Penelope, who waited with patience, weaving and unraveling the same shroud by candlelight. With help from his son Telemachus, his loyal swineherd, and the bow only he could string, Odysseus executed the suitors one by one, painting the great hall with blood. Peace was momentarily restored, but the cycles of war and vengeance lingered. Others faced even graver fates. Ajax the Lesser fell by Athena's hand for his misdeeds, and Diomedes, despite his bravery, returned to find his wife unfaithful and his city against him. He roamed westward, establishing cities that faded into myth. Philoctetes, who killed Paris using Heracles' bow, found no welcome upon his return, becoming a wanderer. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, met his end at Apollo's altar in Delphi, perhaps in atonement for the bloodshed at Troy. The Trojan War promised glory but delivered only despair. The heroes who once fought shoulder to shoulder at Ilium returned to shattered homes, disenchanted wives, unfriendly gods, and the haunting refrain of songs that no longer reflected their truths. In the end, there were no true victors, only those who survived. Before the walls of Troy were erected, before heroes raised their shields or ships sailed the wide dark sea, there existed an ancient force of power, predating humanity and even war itself, the rule of the gods. Their tales are often obscured beneath mortal stories, yet it was the Olympians who wove the very fabric of destiny. And they were not always the rulers. Before Olympus rose chaos, followed by Gaia, Uranus, Cronus, and the tumultuous birth of divine order. The age of the Titans concluded with fire and thunder. Zeus, the youngest of Cronus' offspring, rebelled against his father, liberating his siblings from their father's grip and banishing the Titans to the dark abyss of Tartarus. The Olympians emerged in their place, 12 in number, their identities and thrones shifting over time. Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, and Hermes formed the new pantheon atop Mount Olympus. They established a fresh order, not more benevolent than the previous one, but intricate and deeply entwined with the fates of mankind. Zeus governed from his golden throne, a thunderbolt always at his side, his voice authoritative among both gods and mortals. His reign was not merely founded on brute strength. He was a wise king who valued alliances, rewarding loyalty while punishing betrayal. He apportioned realms among his brothers, the sky for himself, the sea for Poseidon, and the underworld for Hades, sharing Earth and Olympus in a fragile equilibrium. The pantheon surrounding him took shape, with Hera, his sister and queen, presiding as the goddess of marriage and childbirth. Despite her days being filled with anger and distrust, due to Zeus's consistent infidelity, Hera remained vigilant. Zeus's countless affairs with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women led to the birth of many impactful children, including Heracles, Perseus, Helen, and Minos. Hera, in her enduring wrath, punished not only his lovers, but also their descendants. Among them stood Athena, who emerged fully formed and armored from Zeus's skull, representing wisdom and warfare. She championed those mortals who relied on intelligence rather than brute strength, notably guiding Athens to thrive under principles of law and reason. In contrast to Ares, who reveled in chaos, Athena's approach to war was strategic and refined, signifying an age in Olympus characterized by intellect alongside might. Apollo and Artemis, the twin offspring of Leto, balanced light and shadow. Apollo, with his golden locks, presided over prophecy, music, and healing, famously communicating enigmatic messages through the Pythia at Delphi, which influenced kings and wars. He could also unleash plagues, as witnessed in Troy. Artemis, his sister, remained a fierce protector of the wilderness, punishing any who violated her sacred domains without hesitation. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, ensured the earth remained bountiful but fell into despair when her daughter Persephone was taken by Hades, causing crops to wither and marking the cycle of seasons with her grief. Aphrodite, who some believe emerged from sea foam following Uranus's dismemberment, governed love and desire, captivating both gods and mortals and intertwining joy with heartbreak. Although wed to Hephaestus, a god of craftsmanship, she was enamored with Ares, personifying the tumult of love and conflict. Hermes, the swift messenger son of Zeus, traversed between realms, acting as a thief, guide for souls, and overseer of boundaries. He seamlessly moved from Olympus to Hades, relishing in his freedom. This new pantheon did not remain aloof. The Olympians were actively involved, favoring certain mortals and subtly influencing events through them. Unlike the Titans, who represented elemental forces, the Olympians reflected human emotions on a divine scale, displaying complex relationships marked by loyalty, animosity, and pride. They contributed to the founding of cities, received sacrifices for their approval, and were honored by oracular predictions. Each household maintained a flame for Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, who required little but offered tranquility in return. Beneath their magnificent existence was a fragile truth: their extensive powers were not limitless. They were bound by oaths, could be deceived by mortals, and were susceptible to the passage of time. Even Zeus, despite his might, was haunted by the dread that one of his children might rise to challenge him, a fear that caused him to abandon his union with Thetis, who was ultimately wed to a mortal named Peleus, to ensure their son Achilles did not live to threaten his reign. This susceptibility to loss and the desire to hold their power steady revealed that the Olympians shared traits with mortals. They faced loss, clung to their reigns, and sought to maintain order. For a time, they reigned supreme, their names carved into grand temples, their stories immortalized in song, and their symbols featured on shields and coins. Although the era of heroes had concluded, the gods still held sway over humanity. Yet distant prophecies hinted at forthcoming changes. New deities were emerging on the horizon, suggesting that temples would not remain full forever, even as Olympus continued to stand. The Olympians wielded great power, but they faced challenges. While monuments to Zeus towered above, and Athena's wisdom radiated throughout city-states, other archer-gods roamed the earth, deities associated with wine, madness, death, and rebirth, often acknowledged only in secret or hidden places. Among these was Dionysus, the last to join Olympus and the one who uniquely bridged the divine and the untamed. His birth defied conventions, as he was the offspring of Zeus and Semele, a mortal woman connected to thievery. When Semele, deceived by Hera, insisted that Zeus reveal his divine form, she was engulfed by his blinding light. From her remains, Zeus rescued the unborn Dionysus, bringing him forth a second time, earning him the title of twice born. Over time, vengeance reemerged. Orestes, the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, returned from exile to kill both his mother and her lover. Spurred on by Apollo and afflicted by the Furies, ancient goddesses who punished those who committed kin murder with madness. His story of bloodshed and redemption would resonate through Athenian courts and legends for generations. However, his was not the only journey back home. Influenced by divine forces, Menelaus and Helen drifted across the sea, pushed south to Egypt by unfavorable winds. Some narratives suggest that the Helen who went to Troy was merely a phantom, while the true Helen remained in Egypt unchanged, while a war was fought over her image. Others claim she left willingly with Paris, and Menelaus eventually forgave her, tired of war and yearning for tranquility. They finally returned to Sparta, ruling together in a silent unease, yet Helen's name, once revered, turned into a curse, and Sparta never regained its former glory after her departure. Yet it was Odysseus whose Odyssey became the most renowned, filled with sorrow and lasting endurance. After the fall of Troy, he did not sail straight home but instead faced a decade of trials at sea, caught between Poseidon's fury and the caprices of fate. He was no innocent bystander. Odysseus had orchestrated the ruse of the wooden horse and led the assault on Troy, angering the gods and desecrating temples. Particularly, Poseidon had marked him for retribution. His ship was cast from one unusual island to another. He blinded Polyphemus, the Cyclops and son of Poseidon, escaping using the name Nobody. He encountered Circe, the sorceress who transformed his men into swine, and Calypso, the sea nymph who kept him as her lover for 7 arduous years. He traveled to the underworld's fringes, conversed with the dead, and experienced the siren song, bound to the mast while his crew blocked their ears with wax. He navigated the treacherous straits between Scylla and Charybdis, losing all his men to storms and mistakes, before finally washing ashore alone on the island of the Phaeacians, who, moved by his plight, offered him a ship and safe passage. Ultimately, he returned to Ithaca in tattered clothing, with a long beard and cold eyes. In his absence, suitors had invaded his home, reveling and scheming to marry his wife Penelope, who had patiently awaited his return by weaving and unweaving a shroud by candlelight. With the assistance of his son Telemachus, his faithful swineherd, and the bow only he could string, Odysseus killed the suitors one by one, soaking the great hall in blood. Peace returned briefly, but the specter of war and retribution loomed ever close. Many others faced worse fates. Ajax the Lesser was struck down by Athena for his transgressions. Diomedes, despite his bravery in battle, found his wife unfaithful and his city against him. He wandered westward, establishing cities that faded into legend. Philoctetes, who killed Paris with Heracles' bow, found no warm welcome and became a wanderer. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, met his end at Delphi, slain at Apollo's altar, possibly as penance for the blood he shed at Troy. The Trojan War had promised glory, but delivered only desolation. The heroes who had once stood side by side beneath Ilium's walls returned to shattered homes. Resentment from their wives, hostility from the gods, and the hollow echoes of songs that no longer reflected the truth. In the end, there were no victors, only those who survived. long before the walls of Troy were erected, before heroes lifted shields or ships moored in the wine-dark sea. An ancient power existed, predating humanity and even wore the jurisdiction of the gods. Their tales often linger beneath the lore of mortals, but it was the Olympians who wove the very fabric of fate. At times, they were not the only rulers. Before Olympus, chaos reigned, and from chaos arose Gaia, Uranus, Cronus, and the tumultuous birth of divine order. The Titan Age concluded in flames and thunder as Zeus, the youngest of Cronus' offspring, rebelled against his father, liberated his siblings from the sky god's belly, and banished the Titans to the dark abyss of Tartarus. In their place emerged the 12 Olympians, their identities evolving over time: Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, and Hermes. On Mount Olympus, they established a new order, not gentler than its predecessor, but shrewder, more complex, and deeply intertwined with the destinies of mortals. Zeus presided from his golden throne, the thunderbolt always at his fingertips, his voice resonant among gods and humans alike. His reign was not solely founded on might. He was a ruler who valued alliances, rewarded loyalty, and punished treachery. He allocated realms among his brothers, the sky for himself, the sea for Poseidon, and the underworld for Hades, sharing Earth and Olympus in a fragile equilibrium. Around him, the new pantheon took form, with Hera, his sister and queen, serving as the goddess of marriage and childbirth. Though her existence was often plagued by fury and jealousy, for Zeus was never faithful. His connections with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women were numerous, each resulting in offspring who would significantly impact the world. Notable among these were Heracles, Perseus, Helen, and Minos. Hera, vigilant as ever, enacted her wrath upon his lovers and their children, delivering relentless punishment. In contrast, Athena emerged not from birth but from Zeus's forehead, fully armed and embodying wisdom and warfare. She preferred to support mortals who utilized intelligence rather than brute strength, guiding cities like Athens to thrive under principles of law and reason. Unlike Ares, who reveled in chaos, Athena's strategy in war was methodical and exacting. Her presence epitomized an era in Olympus, characterized not just by might but by intellect. Apollo and Artemis, the twins of Leto, represented light and darkness. Apollo, resplendent with golden hair, presided over prophecy, music, and healing, claiming the Delphic oracle, where the Pythia communicated cryptic messages that influenced kings and wars. However, he also had the power to unleash plagues, as he did on the Achaeans during the Trojan War. Artemis, his sister, fiercely protected the wilderness, hunting without regard for human trespassers in her cherished domains. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, ensured the land remained fertile, though her despair over her daughter Persephone's abduction by Hades resulted in barren crops and the creation of the seasons, a cycle of sorrow and renewal reflected in every winter and spring. Aphrodite, rumored to have emerged from the sea foam created by Uranus's severed flesh, governed love and desire, inciting madness in both gods and mortals alike. Although married to Hephaestus, the god of craftsmanship, she offered her heart to Ares, representing the turbulent blend of desire and conflict. Hermes, the clever son of Zeus, traversed between realms as a messenger, thief, and guide for souls. Known as the god of boundaries, he could pass freely between Olympus and Hades, displaying a constant, playful demeanor. This new generation of deities did not remain aloof. The Olympians were intimately involved in human affairs, taking sides and engaging in subtle conflicts through mortals. Unlike the Titans, who embodied primal forces, the Olympians reflected elevated human traits, flawed yet powerful, their emotions tangled in love and resentment. They granted favors and imposed obstacles according to their whims. Temples were constructed in their honor, and sacrifices were made to win their goodwill. Oracles conveyed their desires, while every household maintained a flame for Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, who asked for little yet provided tranquility in return. Yet, beneath their splendor lay a fundamental truth. Their immense power was not absolute. They could be bound by oaths, deceived by mortals, and ultimately succumb to time. Even Zeus, in his might, was tormented by the fear of being overthrown by one of his offspring, prompting him to abandon his union with Thetis, who instead wed the mortal Peleus to ensure Achilles would meet an early death. In many ways, the Olympians mirrored humanity, grappling with fears of loss and fiercely protecting their dominion. Yet, they ruled for a time, their legacies inscribed in marble temples and celebrated in songs, with their symbols adorning shields and coins. The age of heroes may have faded, but the gods continued to wield influence over the human realm. Nonetheless, whispers of change echoed from distant lands, hinting at new deities beyond the horizon. Although the temples filled rapidly, Olympus remained, standing tall amid challenges. Even as Zeus's temple soared high and Athena inspired the minds of city-states, darker deities walked among mortals, gods associated with wine, madness, death, and rebirth, worshipped not in open altars, but in secret groves and torchlit caves. Leading these was Dionysus, the last to ascend to Olympus. Among the divine and the untamed, Dionysus stood uniquely apart. Unlike other gods, his very existence challenged both the natural order and societal norms. The offspring of Zeus and Seal, a mortal princess associated with thieves, his origins were extraordinary. When Semele, deceived by Hea, insisted that Zeus reveal his true godly form, she was engulfed by his blinding glory. Yet, from her ashes, Zeus rescued the unborn child and carefully sewn him into his own thigh. Months later, Dionysus emerged for the second time, hence earning the name Twice Born. From his rebirth onward, his journey diverged sharply from that of any other Olympian. Instead of being nurtured on Olympus, he spent his formative years in distant lands, among nymphs in Nyssa, in caves in India, befriending satyrs and naiads. With a flute and vines, he roamed freely rather than ruling from a throne, surrounded by ecstatic revelers in dance. Where he ventured, vineyards flourished and rationality faded. Dionysus represented not just wine, but the delicate sacred balance between civilization and chaos, and between ecstasy and madness. His influence stirred joy, but also wild frenzy, leading individuals to momentarily lose themselves. His arrival in Greece faced significant opposition. Towns derided his claims, and kings denied his worship. He retaliated against these injustices one after another. In his mother's homeland, he returned incognito, igniting unrest among his followers with drums and cries. The rigid King Pantheus attempted to suppress the chaos by arresting Dionysus, ridiculing his wild rites and spying on the women of the hills. However, Dionysus lured him into the woods disguised as a woman, and in a frenzy of divine madness, it was his own mother, Agave, who led the Maenads to tear him apart. It was only when she entered the city bearing her son's head on a thyrsus that the enchantment faded, casting a long shadow over all thieves. Dionysus also embodied the spirit of theater, intertwining masks and performances that revealed hidden truths. His festivals became central to Greek drama, where comedies and tragedies unfolded in his name, allowing the Greeks to express fears and desires that were otherwise unspoken. To worship Dionysus meant to utterly submit to a power that transformed the worshipper. In contrast to the formal rites of Olympus, these cults offered personal connections. The Eleusinian mysteries depicted the poignant tale of a daughter lost to and reclaimed from death, while the Orphics revered Dionysus as a god who experienced dismemberment and resurrection, whose struggles imparted wisdom and whose rites promised liberation from the cycle of life. These mysteries did not oppose the Olympians, but operated quietly and profoundly beneath them, sowing hope in place of the mere legends from the thundering gods. They hinted at a resilient soul, capable of transcending the constraints of the mortal body, causing unsettling shifts in the established order. Even within Olympus, unrest brewed. The gods engaged in bitter conflicts, with Ares and Athena vying for warriors' allegiance, and Apollo succumbing to love, repeatedly leaving a trail of loss and transformation. While Aphrodite punished mortals for desires she incited, the gods increasingly resembled the flawed mortals they governed. Proud, capricious, and vulnerable, in Dionys, the Olympian hierarchy encountered its reflection and potential demise. He was divine yet lived as a nomad, summoning joy alongside madness, toppling monarchs while uplifting commoners. Most significantly, he redefined the essence of divinity itself. The gods were no longer distant and eternal. Through rituals, mysteries, and the intoxicating joys of life, mortals began to sense the divine presence within themselves. Not confined to temples, divinity revealed itself in the very essence of humanity. Far beyond the wine-dark seas and marble columns, new deities were awakening. The ascent of Rome signaled a significant transformation, and Olympus, despite its might and splendor, began to sense shifting winds on the mountaintop. The Olympians, despite their everlasting existence and renown, frequently descended into the realm of humans, taking on roles as lovers, tempters, warriors, or avengers. They mingled with mortals, not merely leaving behind oracles or prophecies, but also progeny. These offspring of gods and humans, known as demigods, entered a world that neither fully welcomed nor restricted them. Some ascended to kingship, others transformed into monsters, while a select few became legends. Their tales have persisted longer than the walls of Troy or the sacred temples of the gods from whom they descended. Among these was Heracles, the son of Zeus and Alcmene, a mortal queen of thieves. His birth was marked by deception, as Zeus disguised himself as her husband, extending the night to ensure his union with her. This act of trickery led to the birth of Heracles, who was immediately under the threat of Hera's vengeance. The queen of the heavens could not tolerate Zeus's infidelity, and she subjected Heracles to a life filled with strife. Even in his infancy, she sent serpents to end his life, but he strangled them with his bare hands. As he grew, Heracles developed extraordinary strength. However, his legend was not solely defined by his might, but also by penance in a fit of divine madness. He tragically killed his wife and children, which filled him with unbearable grief. Seeking redemption, he visited the Oracle of Delphi, who instructed him to serve Eurystheus, a minor king, and to complete 12 daunting tasks, each seemingly more impossible than the last. Heracles faced the Nemean lion, whose skin could not be pierced. He defeated the Lernaean Hydra, severing each of its heads. He captured the Erymantian boar. He cleaned the Augean stables in a single day. He drove away the Stymphalian birds, and he tamed the Cretan bull. In addition, he stole the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, captured the cattle of Geryon, retrieved the golden apples from the Hesperides, and ventured into Hades to bring back Cerberus, the three-headed dog. Every challenge was not just a test of strength, but a confrontation with death, the extremities of existence and the essence of human suffering. Through these trials, Heracles transcended the role of a hero and became a symbol of human endurance, finding redemption through perseverance. At his death, poisoned by a robe soaked in centaur blood, he constructed his own funeral pyre and ascended it, leaving his mortal life behind. The gods welcomed him to Olympus, where even Hera eventually acknowledged him as a deity. He became the only mortal to join the pantheon, a god forged in suffering. Yet, Heracles was not the first demigod, nor was he the sole figure whose story influenced mankind. Long before him, Perseus, another son of Zeus, was born of Dano, who had been imprisoned in a bronze tower due to a prophecy that foretold her child would kill her father. However, fate cannot be contained. Zeus approached her not as a man but as a shower of gold, resulting in Perseus's birth. Abandoned at sea in a chest, mother and son were rescued by a compassionate fisherman. Unfortunately, a king's lust, this time Polydeuces' desire for Dano, compelled Perseus into danger. Tasked with retrieving the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone. Perseus set out on his perilous adventure equipped by the gods. Hermes provided a sword, and Athena offered Apollo a shield. He acquired the Eye of the Gree, three sisters who shared a single eye, learning the location of Medusa with Athena's guidance. He approached her while she slept, using the reflection from his shield to avoid looking directly at her, and successfully severed her head. From her decapitated neck emerged Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a golden warrior. With their assistance, Perseus escaped and, on his return journey, saved Andromeda from a sea monster, ultimately marrying her and founding dynasties that would connect to Heracles. Intertwining their fates, others existed as well, such as Theseus, son of Poseidon or Aegis depending on the narrative, who defeated the Minotaur and ushered Athens into its first period of empire. There was also Bellerophon, the rider of Pegasus, who killed the Chimera but soared too high and fell, as well as Atalanta, raised by bears and as swift as the wind, sometimes said to be the daughter of Artemis, who bested suitors in a race, but was ultimately undone by love and distraction. The demigods were seldom granted peace. Their heritage was too divine for comfort, yet too mortal for eternity. The gods observed them with a mixture of pride and fear, as each demigod blurred the lines between Olympus and Earth, prompting mortals to venerate them not just for their victories, but for their hardships as well. They endured pain, bled, and sometimes perished, achieving a form of immortality through narrative that the gods could never possess. As memories of Troy faded and cities rose and fell, the tales of these demigods endured. They adorned amphorae and temple friezes, resonated in poetry and drama. Even as the gods resided distantly on Olympus, growing more silent in time, it was in the lives of their mortal children that humanity discovered its reflections, flawed, courageous, doomed, and magnificent. In the realm of Greek myth, power did not exclusively reside with the gods or the heroes. There was something deeper, something ancient that resonated beneath every decision, death, triumph, and sorrow. Fate is not a deity. Though it commands the respect of even the gods, it is not merely a law, yet it governs even divine beings. Rather, fate is an undeniable truth, a force akin to gravity, invisible yet unavoidable, intricately interwoven into the fabric of existence. The Greeks referred to it as Moira, sometimes personified as three sisters known as the Fates, who spun, measured, and severed the threads of every life. Cloth represented the thread. Lysius determined its length, and Atropos, the immutable one, cut it at the designated moment. Even Zeus, the ruler of Olympus, was subject to their authority. His thunderous appeals meant nothing when Atropos wielded her shears as no force, divine or earthly, could prevent her actions. Thus, with fate overseeing all, what hope did humanity possess? The solution lay in omens and oracles, a mysterious and intricate communication from the divine, directed at those willing to interpret them. The Greeks held no belief that they could alter their fates. Instead, they thought they might comprehend them. Foreseeing the future was a means to prepare one's spirit against its inevitability. The most renowned oracle in Greece resided at Delphi, where Apollo spoke through the Pythia, a woman enveloped in steam above a fissure in the temple's floor. She inhaled the vapors and entered a trance, interpreting Apollo's messages as riddles and fragments. People from all walks of life, kings, generals, common folk, sought her counsel, some chasing glory, others merely wishing to survive. Yet her pronouncements were rarely straightforward, as Apollo was not one to provide certainties. A prophecy, much like a double-edged sword, could produce unintended consequences. Numerous tales revolved around her enigmatic declarations. Chryses, the king of Lydia, asked if he should attack the Persians and was warned that crossing the river would lead to the destruction of a great empire unbeknownst to him. That empire was his own. Oedipus received the dire prediction that he would kill his father and wed his mother. Despite his parents' attempts to thwart this fate by abandoning him, Oedipus fled his presumed home to escape it, only to inadvertently walk directly into the fulfillment of the prophecy. The oracle, was always right. It was human misinterpretation that led to their downfall. Other oracles existed as well. At Dodona, the sacred oaks whispered Zeus's will. At Delos, where Leto gave birth to Apollo and Artemis at Ammon and Lydia. And in numerous smaller shrines where dreams, animal internals, bird flights, or flickering flames divulged the inscrutable. Before every battle, generals sought omens, a flash of lightning, a flight of crows, or an ill-timed sneeze, each not as trivial as it seemed, but rather messages from the divine. A general who disregarded these signals risked not just defeat, but divine retribution. Sacrifices were customary prior to sea voyages, birds, and weddings. Seers interpreted the entrails of goats and the livers of oxen to discern the gods' intentions in the dark, wet patterns of blood and flesh. The ability to read omens itself became a form of power, with seers like Calchas, who guided the Greeks at Troy, and Tiresias, the blind prophet, holding influence on par with kings. Tiresias, having experienced life as both male and female, was said to have lived across 7 generations, his wisdom unparalleled, but his insights could be a curse for those who solicited them. However, oracles and omens represented more than simple superstitions. They embodied a profound understanding among the Greeks that mortals did not hold the reins of control. Regardless of a hero's might, noble lineage, or loyal heart, the wheel of fate incessantly turned, ultimately leading to all being shattered. The gift of prophecy was not about power, but rather about awareness. Too late, this awareness often resonated as a tragedy. Nevertheless, humanity continued to seek prophecies, climbing the mountain paths to Delphi, bringing offerings of gold and goat blood, and asking questions with quivering voices. Even if fate could not be altered, it could be confronted. To recognize the approaching storm didn't stop it, but it allowed one to face it with open eyes. In the struggle between knowledge and powerlessness, the known and the feared, the Greeks discovered significance. Their narratives did not revolve around conquering destiny, but rather maintaining dignity within it. Hector, aware of his impending death, donned his armor. Achilles, cognizant that he would not return, sailed for Troy. Oedipus sought to escape his fate, only to meet it head-on. The Pythia continued to murmur her riddles year after year, a voice embodying the cold breath of a world that had already predetermined what lay ahead. To the ancient Greeks, death was viewed not as a final chapter, but as a mere cessation of life. The afterlife was neither akin to heaven nor hell as understood in Christianity, but rather an ancient and neutral domain. This realm, known as Hades, named after the god who presided over it, was a place beneath the earth where all departed souls, from the illustrious to the infamous, embarked on their ultimate journey. Hades was devoid of fiery torment or demonic entities, yet evoked such fear that people often refrained from uttering the god's name. Instead, they referred to him as Pluton, emphasizing the wealth that originated from the earth, much like the dead themselves. The underworld's geography was constructed from myth and memory, rather than rationality, fronted by 5 rivers. Styx, the river of hatred and oaths. Acheron, the river of sorrow. Phlegethon, the river of fire. Cocytus, the river of lament. And Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. These rivers established both physical and spiritual boundaries. Souls entered as shadows, formless and voiceless, assisted by Charon, the ferryman who transported them across Acheron for a fee. Those who were not properly buried, or could not pay, were doomed to wander the shores for a century, lamenting their fate. Upon arrival, they faced Cerberus, the 3-headed dog tasked with keeping the dead inside and the living out. Beyond Cerberus lay the plains of Asphodel, a gray and dreary expanse where most souls drifted in silent forgetfulness, reminiscent of rustling leaves. However, fates diverged significantly within this domain. The underworld had its judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, who evaluated each soul's deeds. The truly malevolent were relegated to Tartarus, a profound abyss of suffering reserved for oath-breakers, murderers, and traitors enduring punishments that mirrored their illicit actions. Sisyphus pushed his boulder. Tantalus eternally thirsted near unattainable water, and Ixion spun on his fiery wheel. Conversely, the exceptionally virtuous could enter the Elysian fields, a paradise of gentle breezes, vibrant meadows, and eternal spring, where heroes enjoyed comfort and their legacies were celebrated. Some souls were given the choice of reincarnation, passing through the river Lethe to erase their pasts and start anew in later mystical traditions. A few hoped to escape this cycle altogether and ascend to the stars. Although such outcomes were rare, central to this underworld was Hades himself, a stoic and unyielding ruler who did not seek veneration or meddle in human affairs. He ruled with an absolute authority, content with the unchanging nature of his domain. His depiction as malevolent in later myths was a misrepresentation, rather. He embodied an indifferent and steadfast presence, overshadowed by Zeus and Poseidon. Beside him was Persephone, the queen of the underworld, whose narrative illustrates the complex duality of death in Greek philosophy. The daughter of Demeter, goddess of agriculture, Persephone was taken by Hades while picking flowers, ushered into the depths without her consent. In her sorrow, Demeter caused the earth to wither, leading to famine as she mourned her daughter's absence. In the end, Zeus dispatched Hermes to retrieve her, but as she had consumed pomegranate seed sixer, perhaps just one, she was bound to Hades. This compromise became symbolic of the seasons. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld, during which Demeter would grieve, and the world would turn cold, and upon her return, life would flourish once more. Thus, life and death became interwoven in a perpetual cycle rather than a finality. Over time, Persephone transformed from a mere captive to a sovereign in her own right, a queen of mysteries who carried a calm authority among the spirits. In the Eleusinian mysteries, sacred rites performed near Athens. A descent and return were celebrated annually, signifying not just the resurgence of agriculture, but also the renewal of the soul. While the underworld was largely insular, a few mortals ventured there and returned to share their experiences. Orpheus enchanted Cerberus and won over Hades and Persephone, but ultimately lost Eurydice with a glance backward. Heracles wrestled Cerberus to the surface, and Odysseus, guided by Circe, honored the dead and summoned the shades of Tiresias Achilles, and Agamemnon, all of whom affirmed that death was not glorious, but merely final. Achilles, once the mightiest Greek, used it better to be a live slave than a dead king. Consequently, the Greeks meticulously crafted their tombs burying their dead with coins for Charon along with weapons, wine, and songs while they offered libations and made sacrifices at family hearths. For them, the dead were never truly absent. They lingered in dreams, sent omens, and could occasionally be summoned for unspoken truths through writings and blood. The underworld mirrored life itself. It embodied memory and offered a sense of justice without appeal. There was no paradise for the devout or punishment for the irreverent. It merely existed vast and shadowy, governed by a deity who sought neither love nor prayers, only silence. In this quietude, the Greeks perceived the essence of eternity through their narratives of Hades and Persephone, the interplay of shadows and judgment, and the rivers and thrones deep underground. They positioned death within the cosmological order, not as a retribution, but as a transition. Even the gods are not eternal in memory, authority, or veneration. There exists a point in every mythological cycle where the divine becomes muted, where once bright figures begin to fade from human dreams, and thrones that resonated strongly succumb to time's smoothing effects. For the Olympian deities, this gradual diminishment commenced not due to warfare or foresight, but with the rise of Rome, which became discontented with antiquated narratives. The Romans did not obliterate the Greek deities. Instead, they embraced them, renaming them and integrating their legends into Roman morals and conquests. Zeus was rebranded as Jupiter, Hera became Juno, and Poseidon was transformed into Neptune, among others. This change was both respectful and strategic. Rome admired the splendor of Olympus, but altered the divine figures to mirror its own values of order hierarchy. An empire Jupiter no longer roared from a rugged peak, but from the Capitoline Hill. Attired like a lawmaker, the untamed nature of Dionysus was refined into the cultured Bacchus, while Athena's fierce independence softened into the civic wisdom of Minerva. In literature, these myths persisted. Ovid recounted them in elegant Latin, laced with irony and poetic elegance, while Virgil's Aeneid portrayed the gods as agents of fate, orchestrating Rome's foundation. Yet something had changed since Homer's time. Where gods roamed the battlefield, impulsive and tangible in the chaos of war. In Roman mythology, they transformed into symbols, becoming distant and politicized, less prone to intervention, now acting as themes rather than direct presences. As the empire expanded, it encountered fresh deities and philosophies. From the east emerged Mithras, a stone-born god and slayer of cosmic bulls. From Egypt came Isis, the mother of magic, adorned in silks and mysteries. From Judea appeared a singular, invisible deity that prohibited images, dismissed idols, and left no space for divine siblings or thunderous kings. These new religions didn't just rival the Olympians. They undermined the foundational structure of Greek belief, where the ancient gods thrived on desire and rank. The emerging faiths provided moral clarity, unity, and salvation. Concurrently, philosophy began to wane the mythic world from its core. Thinkers like Xenophon ridiculed the anthropomorphic portrayal of gods, suggesting that if bovines had deities, they would look like cattle. Plato appreciated myth's beauty, but questioned its literal truth, positing that the gods should be perfect and virtuous, unlike the jealous and lustful beings of Olympus. Epicurus acknowledged the gods' existence, but claimed they were indifferent to human affairs, deeming fear of divine retribution a superstition to be discarded. Even Stoicism, with its strict moral code, conceptualized divinity not through figures, but as intrinsic reason, the logos ruling all. By the time the imperial cult emerged, when emperors were worshipped as divine and altars erected for mortal men, the distinction between myth and politics had entirely dissolved. The older gods were reduced to symbols. Their temples became more about tradition than faith. Farmers still made offerings to Demeter, and sailors prayed to Poseidon, but genuine belief waned. The flame of Olympus had not extinguished, but its light was dim then. An unprecedented transformation arrived, not from a rival cult, but from a new faith, Christianity, which began as a marginalized sect of persecuted followers, began to permeate the empire, spreading not through violence, but through the spoken word. Its deity was unseen, unified, and all-powerful. Its narratives revolved around sin and redemption, rather than love and revenge over time. Its sanctuaries supplanted the ancient ones. Its hymns silenced previous tales, and its clergy condemned the Olympian gods as demons or illusions. By the time of Theodosius I's reign, pagan temples were legally closed, the Olympic Games abolished, and sacrificial rites outlawed. The ancient deities did not resist. There was no climactic battle between Zeus and Christ. There was no divine assault on Jerusalem or Rome. Instead, the Olympian deities gradually diminished. Akin to the last rays of daylight, their statues, now worn and silent, stood unmoving. Altars that once burned bright lay cold, while marble columns cracked with ivy overtaking the spots where priests once officiated. The myths persisted, but transformed into literature rather than objects of belief. Children learned of Heracles in classrooms rather than in sacred spaces. Although artists depicted Athena, they no longer offered prayers to her. The gods, once capable of commanding storms and determining fates, became mere tales, beautiful, enigmatic, and haunting. Yet they persisted. Even as their temples fell into disrepair, they lingered in whispers, poetry, and the fabric of Western imagination. They enjoyed a renaissance in paintings of the era, in the philosophies of Enlightenment, and in the Romantic epics and contemporary interpretations that followed. They evolved into symbols of war and wisdom, love and treachery. pride and grandeur. The Greeks gave them human characteristics, granting them a different kind of immortality. While the temples crumbled and oracles fell silent, the Thales of Olympus endured. They morphed into faint echoes at first, like a distant melody carried by the wind, growing louder with the passage of time as society once more tuned in to listen. Myths, unlike empires, are not confined by walls and weaponry. They thrive in the imagination, enabling the gods to find ways to return. Over the lengthy centuries marked by Christian ascendancy in Europe, the gods might not have been revered. Yet they were never erased from memory. Monks and scholars, at times reluctantly, preserved the writings of Homer, Hesiod, Euripides, and Sophocles, even as they denounced the very beliefs that had once supported those works. The ancient Thales survived not in temples, but rather in libraries among sermons and treatises. Then emerged the Renaissance, a pivotal period when Europe looked back to propel itself forward. In the courts of Florence and the chapels of Rome, thinkers such as Petrarch and Erasmus brought the gods back to life, not as entities to worship, but as representations of human nature. Artists adorned Aphrodite with seashells and light, while sculptors immortalized Apollo with his bow and elegance. Poets summoned the muses anew. Myth found new life in art rather than altars and incense. The gods might have relinquished their dominion over the heavens, yet they reigned supreme within the realm of art. During the Age of Enlightenment, as reason challenged superstition, myths continued to thrive. They were examined, translated, and analyzed. Voltaire viewed them as allegories, while Goethe perceived them as reflections of the soul. The subsequent Romantic movement heralded a resurgence of emotional, tragic, and sublime themes, prompting writers to delve into the narratives of Oedipus and Antigone, Orpheus, and others, discovering eternal questions about fate, love, and the essence of humanity. The advent of the modern age saw myth break free from classical confines, appearing within literature, film, psychology, and even comic books. Carl Jung interpreted the gods as archetypes within the psyche that constantly resurfaced. James Joyce integrated them into the streets of Dublin, while Rick Riordan reimagined their stories for schoolchildren in Manhattan. In the realms of Marvel and DC, they roamed once more, not in traditional robes but clad in armor and spandex. Yet, the old Thales remained unchanged. In the backdrop, Odysseus still set sail, Heracles toiled, and Persephone continued her annual ascent. They were not forgotten. They were merely transformed through generations into new expressions, languages, and dreams. Myth is not a static entity. It is a vibrant memory shaped by those who carry it forward. What the Greeks imparted was not merely a pantheon, but a framework for understanding the world, grappling with mortality, honoring beauty, and exploring the self. Their gods were undoubtedly flawed, but in those imperfections lay their grandeur. They showcased not just ideals of perfection, but the potential for growth. The anguish of choice, the excitement of taking risks, and the comfort found in rituals. They illuminated what we might achieve and what we ought to fear. Even today, in an era dominated by science and quietude, the myths continue to echo. They reverberate through tales of chosen heroes, fallen stars, and the gradual shifts of seasons. A girl descends as spring approaches, a king defies fate, yet loses all, and a mother mourns for the son. While the faces may change, the underlying truths remain constant. The gods may have departed from Olympus, but they have never truly abandoned us. They walk softly now in literature, songs, dreams, and memories, residing in every narrative that dares to venture beyond the mortal veil. They are not extinct. They have merely shifted locations. And now, the narrative draws to a close. The winds atop Mount Olympus have turned cold, and the torches at Delos have turned to ash, yet the myths endure. Good night.